Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Nero. For this one we are taking it all the way back to the age of the Roman Empire. When we think back to these times, they weren't necessarily the most kind, peaceful of times, but there certainly are some characters that stand out as being particularly brutal, and one of those is Nero. Throughout his reign, he wreaked havoc on the Roman Empire, he burned cities, he killed thousands of people, including every member of his own family, and I mean, we know the inventive execution methods of the past, so you can probably guess at just how brutal these all were. Most Roman sources give us an almost completely negative review of him in reference to both his personality and his reign as a leader. He was called compulsive and corrupt, and it is believed that he is actually to blame for the great fire that burned Rome, but instead he used the Christians as a scapegoat so that they would receive punishments rather than him. In the end, after being declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate and realizing that the rebellion would be lost, he ended up taking his own life at the age of 30. In our number 9 spot today we have Shoko Asahara. Leader of the Shinriko cult, this person claimed to be the reincarnation of the Hindu god Shiva. He said that he was destined to lead his followers to salvation once the apocalypse came, but then once he lured in followers, he claimed that he could also teach them to levitate and develop telepathic abilities. Seems very legit. Apparently, those who were the most skeptical, he allowed them to drink his bathwater. No idea why or what this was supposed to be for, and I wish I could unlearn it to be honest, but now we all just have to suffer with that information together. The cult continued to grow and drew in influential and wealthy people, and what did he do? Well, he made a science division of this cult, and this is where they studied the microorganisms living in his bathwater. I'm just kidding, it was actually really messed up. The group went on to attack Tokyo in 1994, which took the lives of 7 people. Then in 1995 they released gas into the Tokyo underground, which led to 12 deaths, 50 injured people, and more than 5,000 people with temporary vision problems. In the end, he and 11 of his disciples ended up being arrested and charged, and they were all sentenced to death in 2004. In our number 8 spot today we have Victoriano Alvarez. Clipperton Island was an island that is located in the Pacific, and during the 18th and 19th century, everyone was trying to lay claim to it and rule it. I'm talking about Britain, France, Mexico, and of course, our friend Victoriano. He was actually the lighthouse keeper on the island, and in 1910, when Mexico needed to stop sending vital supplies to the island because they were focused on the rising revolution happening there, most of the inhabitants ended up contracting scurvy, which sadly led to their death. In the end, only Victoriano, a small group of soldiers, and about 12 women and children were left. The soldiers ended up passing away shortly after in an accident, so you know what Mr. Lighthouse did? He threw all but one of the rifles into the sea, loaded the one remaining weapon, and like the worst person he is, he declared himself king of the island. From here, he went on to kill anyone who disagreed with him, and he was also extremely harmful to the women who unfortunately were left on the island. That was until one badass woman named Tirza Randon simply had enough. She found a hammer and well, the rest is history. In our number 7 spot today we have Richard Nixon. This is perhaps one of the largest scandals and leaks in history, especially in the history of the United States. In the middle of 1972 there were 5 men who were arrested for breaking into and subsequently trying to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel complex in Washington, D.C. As the year went on, the 1972 presidential election came closer, and there was an anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward that, quote, the Watergate bugging incident stemmed from a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage conducted on behalf of President Nixon's re-election and directed by officials of the White House. Despite this information leak and it being reported in the news, Nixon was still re-elected, but he was also under serious investigation. There were a series of Senate hearings, and the Senate even went on to create a special investigative committee. The hearings were broadcast nationwide, and they had witnesses testifying that Nixon had approved plans to cover up administration involvement in the break-in, and that there was a voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office. These hearings captured the attention of Americans everywhere for weeks, and in the end the United States Supreme Court ruled that Nixon had to release these Oval Office tapes to government investigators, which then went on to reveal that he had not only attempted to cover up what went on, but he also later tried to use federal officials to deflect the investigation. Under the threat of an imminent impeachment, Nixon Nixon had no choice but to admit his guilt and resign, making him the only president to do so. His successor, Gerald Ford, ended up pardoning him, so he escaped prosecution, but there were 69 other people indicted, with 48 of them later being convicted. Remember that anonymous source who spilled the information in the first place? Well, his identity remained a secret for 33 years, until 2005, when former FBI agent Mark Felt revealed himself as the source. This is probably the biggest political scandal in US history, and it revealed corruption beyond what Americans at the time could believe. It truly changed the way that people would look at government leaders forever. In our number 6 spot today, we have Kurt Gödel. The Austrian-American philosopher and mathematician Kurt Gödel lived from 1906 to 1978, and he made quite a name for himself. Being compared to the likes of Aristotle and Einstein, he is best known for his incompleteness theorem, which was a very significant mathematical result. He was obviously very successful and found himself teaching and educating a younger generation, but his personal life is where things got quite dark. When he was just 6 years old, he had a case of rheumatic fever which left him quite ill for the rest of his childhood. This led to him first being pretty preoccupied with his health, and unfortunately this turned into hypochondria, which then led him down a path of complete paranoia. He ended up having an irrational fear of getting poisoned, so to avoid this he would only eat food that had been prepared by his wife, who also had to taste it beforehand. Sadly, his wife was hospitalized in 1977 for 6 months, which obviously left her unable to prepare food for him. Because of the fact that she was unable to do this for him, during this period he refused to eat, which eventually led to him starving to death. In our number 5 spot today, we have Albert Fall. Albert Fall was the Secretary of the Interior to former President Warren G. Harding, and while in this position, he decided to secretly allow oil companies to tap into the Teapot Dome oil reserve in Wyoming and the Elk Hills oil reserve in California. Of course, the reason he did this is because he could make a ton of extra money doing this, like several $100,000. This all started to unravel though in 1922, when there was an expose that revealed that the oil had been sold without any sort of competitive bidding. After this expose, Robert La Follette, who was a senator from Wisconsin, created an investigation into the story by the Senate Committee on Public Lands. The Attorney General at the time, Harry Dougherty, began to get some flack for not investigating this alleged corruption, so Harry turned to the FBI director to help him out. The FBI director, William J. Burns, sent an agent to Robert, the senator from Wisconsin's office, to search for anything that could be used to blackmail him into stopping the investigation into the corruption. Despite this seemingly obvious threat, Robert knew that this meant that his investigation was going to reveal something serious, which motivated him to continue on with it. In the end, the shady dealings and all of the bribery was revealed, and Albert Fall was officially exposed. This entire ordeal led to him being the first United States cabinet secretary to go to prison. In our number 4 spot today, we have Velvely Dickinson. Velvely is a name I've never heard before, and I thought it sounded kind of cool and nice until I heard about the person it belonged to. Velvely is one of the reasons why we should never judge a book by its cover. On the outside, she appeared to be like a regular older lady who ran a doll store. Who would think the owner of a doll store would ever be a villain? Okay, maybe everyone. But anyway, as far as I know, everything started out more normal, but once her husband passed away from a heart attack, things took a very sinister twist as she started to take on some interesting side projects for a little extra cash. In 1942, the FBI was able to intercept a letter that was on its way to Buenos Aires. The letter spoke of a quote, wonderful doll hospital and quote, 3 old English dolls, and the FBI was like, hey, that's kind of weird. So their cryptographers went to work, and it was uncovered that this letter was actually sent in code. As it turns out, these letters were actually sending military secrets to Japan, and some of the information within them would have been extremely valuable if the letter hadn't been intercepted and never delivered. Turns out that Velvely had visited the Japanese Institute in New York, befriended the consul general, and connected with a Japanese naval attaché. The FBI arrested Dickinson, and upon doing so, they found huge amounts of cash along with the instructions for the code she was to use in the letters. She ended up being sentenced to 10 years in prison. In our number 3 spot today, we have Monica Witt. Monica is a former United States Air Force technical sergeant as well as defense contractor who has been on the run since 2018. Despite her high-ranking position and high security clearance, she is on the run because she defected to Iran in 2013. It is said that from 2013 up until she was found out that she was using her position in order to spy on the United States and relay relay that information back to the group she was working for. She used different fake Facebook accounts, and it is said that the information she gave included the classified true name and counterintelligence activities of a US intelligence operative. This is of course a problem regardless of how important this operative was, but it is said that this information she shared had the potential to cause serious damage to United States national security. It truly is an absolutely wild story, and Monica is still out there on the run, hiding from the consequences of her betrayal and espionage. In our number 2 spot today, we have Irene of Athens. Taking it back to the Byzantine Empire, Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory though. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yep, that's how good old Mumsy came into power. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Boy Jones. Okay, I've heard of people being called Boy Jones before, but little did I know Boy Jones was a very real and very creepy person. His full name was Edward Jones, and this little rascal basically stalked the Queen from 1838 to 1841. He managed to break into Buckingham Palace, and we aren't just talking about once, we are talking about many times. He knew exactly where to go and what to do, and once in the castle, well, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, he would sit on her throne, and worst of all, he would go through her clothing, like a little creep. He even went as far as to steal her clothes, which is just stupid, of course. Taking evidence of your crimes is bad practice. Thankfully, he did finally get caught, but man, a few years of sneaking in and sitting on the throne. That's crazy. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Belle Gunness. Belle Gunness was a Norwegian-American serial killer who is believed to have killed over 40 people, including her own family, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Belle was born in Norway in 1859 and immigrated to the United States in 1881. She settled in Chicago, where she married her first husband and started a family. This was all fine and well until things soon took quite the turn. Belle began to collect life insurance policies on her family members, and if you're a true crime fan, you likely know where this is going. She went on to eventually kill them in a fire. She then moved to LaPorte, Indiana, where she purchased a farm and continued to lure wealthy suitors to her property just to kill them for their money and assets. She was known for her physical strength and was able to bury her victims' bodies on her property. Belle's crimes were discovered in 1908 when a fire destroyed her farm and the remains of several of her victims were found. We love when the villain is brought to justice, but unfortunately, that did not happen here. Belle herself was never found, and it is believed that she may have faked her own death and fled the country. In our number 9 spot today, we have Dorothea Puente. You know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover? Well, this certainly is a case of that. If you took a glance at Dorothea and knew nothing about her, you'd probably assume she was someone's kind grandma who also had some cookies and a glass of milk waiting, but that could not be any further from the actual truth. In reality, she was actually a serial killer, and she decided to prey upon some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, people who were seeking help and assistance. Dorothea operated a large rooming house that was set in a large Victorian home in Sacramento, California. The residents who would often stay there were people who struggled with different substances such as alcohol, people who had been in mental hospitals, and the elderly. All of these people were receiving social security checks, and if they suddenly vanished, she figured no one would ask. In 1982, they did begin to vanish, but of course their social security checks were continually being cashed. As it turns out, Dorothea was taking their lives and then their money. She has now been called the landlady from hell. In our number 8 spot today, we have Yang Xinhai. You might be familiar with Yang already, as he is quite a notorious name in Chinese criminal history. Also known as the Monster Killer, Yang was a Chinese serial killer who killed at least 67 people between 2000 and 2003. Yang was born in 1968 in the central Chinese province of Henan, and he had a troubled childhood. He began his killing spree in 2000 when he started breaking into houses in rural areas and killing entire families. He targeted mainly farmers and migrant workers who were often living alone in isolated areas. Yang was eventually caught in 2003 after a massive manhunt, and he was found to be suffering from a mental illness. He confessed to his crimes and was sentenced to death in 2004. His execution was carried out in 2004 by firing squad, and his case is considered one of the most heinous and disturbing in Chinese criminal history. In our number 7 spot today, we have Pedro Lopez. Pedro is a man who lived a life committing some of the most horrific crimes I've ever heard of throughout South America in the 1970s. By the time the 1980s rolled around, he made a mistake during one of his awful crimes, and this thankfully led to his arrest. Once in police custody, he began to basically explain his entire life story, and he confessed to an astronomical amount of crimes. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994. I'm like, great. Just before I was born. Nice. He wasn't just sent home straight away and instead was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years after, but he was also released from there. So aside from the crimes he committed, are you ready for the worst part? In 2002, he was suspected of being the perpetrator of a new crime, but no one has been able to find him since 1998. Yeah, he just disappeared. That's awesome. Love it. In our number 6 spot today, we have another Pedro Rodrigues Filho, also known as the Pedrinho Matador. He is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and 1970s. He did have quite a difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually really sadly harmed and killed his mother, so this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in his life, and Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, starting with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and very unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I'm sure we can all feel sympathy for the things Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do. In our number 5 spot today, we have Ivina Fisher. You may have heard Ivina's name before, and that is because she made American history when she became the first female serial killer in the United States. Wow, what a title. Sure, her parents were proud. Ivina, along with her husband John, were accused of luring travelers into their inn in Charleston, South Carolina during the 19th century and then killing them so that they could take their belongings. The couple were known for their hospitality, and many unsuspecting travelers fell victim to their deadly scheme as a result. Some stories even suggest that they had a trap door in one of the guest rooms that led to a pit where they would dump all of the bodies of their victims. Despite the numerous accusations and suspicions surrounding the Fishers, they were never formally charged with the killing. However, they were eventually caught and convicted for highway robbery and sentenced to hang. In our number 4 spot today, we have Arthur Shawcross. This man is also known as the Genesee River Killer, and his crime spree began in 1972. In trying to navigate these online guidelines, I can't exactly say who he specifically targeted, but what I will say is that while everyone on this list is particularly horrible, Arthur's crimes were some of the worst, if you catch my drift. This story, however, is a little unlike some of the others today, because after the first 2 of his crimes, he was apprehended, but for some insane reason, they allowed him to have a plea bargain where he was allowed to plead guilty to just 1 charge of only manslaughter, for which he served 14 years of his 25-year sentence. In the least surprising turn of events, once he was released on early probation, his real crime spree got started. He would go on to take the lives of 12 women from 1988 to 1989, and thankfully he was finally caught for these crimes and sent right back to prison. Of course, his initial early release was the subject of huge controversy, rightfully so, and Dr. Michael H. Stone, professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, called this early release, quote, one of the most egregious examples of the unwarranted release of a prisoner. In the end, Arthur passed away in prison while serving a 250-year sentence. He passed in 2008 after suffering a heart attack. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Hwasong serial killer. This is the name used to describe a notorious unsolved criminal case that occurred in South Korea during the late 1980s. The killer was responsible for taking the lives of at least 10 women in the city of Hwasong between 1986 and 1991. The victims were all found, but there was little to no evidence left at the crime scenes. The case was highly publicized and became one of the most infamous serial killer cases in South Korean history. Despite a massive investigation and the arrest of several suspects, including a man who confessed to the crimes, DNA evidence ultimately exonerated all of them. The case remains unsolved to this day, with many theories and speculations surrounding the identity of the killer. The Hwasong serial killer case sparked significant changes in the way South Korea approaches criminal investigations, though, including the establishment of a national DNA database and the implementation of more advanced forensic techniques. In our number 2 spot today, we have Franklin Dwayne Alex. Franklin is a man who had quite an insane crime spree that lasted for about 6 months in the 1990s. Although short, it was anything but sweet. The spree started off in August of 1997 in Houston, Texas, and over the course of this spree, Franklin took the lives of at least 3 people. He committed robberies, he harmed people, he attempted to take more lives where thankfully the people survived, he kidnapped people. Literally any serious crime he could commit during those 6 months, he was doing it. In the end, Franklin was caught and put on trial for his crime spree, and he received a sentence of death, which was carried out on March 30th, 2010. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Dale Hausner and Samuel Dietman. Known as the serial shooters, the crimes these guys committed are definitely on the list of fears I have, which I'm pretty sure spawned from a Criminal Minds episode. These two were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random drive-by shootings. That's the really scary part. The fire thing is also bad, don't get me wrong, but there's just something about completely random violence that absolutely terrifies me. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was found guilty of 80 out of the 87 felony charges that were brought forth, and that was all in one single trial. The charges included the killings and attempted killings he had done, arson, animal cruelty, and the drive-bys. In the end, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While Dale sat on death row, he apparently asked to be put to death as soon as possible, and in the end, in 2013, he decided to take his own life. Samuel, however, remains in prison.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire or the Moon Maniac. So that's great. Or the Boogeyman himself. Those are the 3 nicknames that he goes by. That's absolutely horrible. It's pretty clear that Albert was a terrible human being who did terrible things that I can't really say. But as his nickname hints towards, he did some horrible things, right? Obviously. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing and doing other things with his teeth to 3 people, but the horror was not over yet. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, that number was really closer to 100. And he even claimed that a lot of these victims came from every state. That's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already horrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He detailed everything about how he lured her and the rest of these horrific things that occurred afterwards, things that I can't say on this, YouTube box. This is one of those people that I'm not, sad at all they don't exist anymore. This is, I'm all about like rehab and treating people, but I'm like, just don't exist. How about that? You just stop eating people. Number 9, Robert Pickton. This horrible person is one of the worst Canadians to ever live and is one of our country's worst serial killers of all time. Pickton dropped out of school and began working at his family's pig farm, and this is where most of his absolutely horrific crimes took place, at this farm. He was first arrested in 2002 and was convicted in 2007 of taking the lives of 6 people, but throughout an extremely lengthy investigation, evidence of many more killings came to light. It's always more than we think, which is horrible. During his time in jail, an undercover police officer posed as his cellmate, and Pickton confessed to 49 crimes to him. 49. Apparently, he was saying to this undercover officer that he wanted to take one more life to make it an even 50, and that he only got caught because he was sloppy. It makes me sick saying that out loud. It's disgusting. The entire trial was a bit of a mess, but it led to a life sentence without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which was the longest possible sentence under Canadian law at the time. This unfortunately does mean that he will be eligible for parole within the next decade. So, yep, let's move on with the list. Number 8, Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story is, again, obviously horrific. He's one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade, he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. How do these people exist? I'm just not realizing that there's definitely an episode of Criminal Minds about this guy. There probably is, right? Sometimes the premise is so dark that it just sticks with you forever. This is one of those. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrific crimes, he was a soft-spoken baker. Yeah, he was a baker, like I said. One of my friends is a baker. I'm gonna message him. I'm gonna ask so many questions now. Robert was heading to church by day and then prowling gentlemen's clubs at night looking for the next victim. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was this bad named Cindy Paulson, who changed history, okay? She was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She made sure of that. Then she went to authorities and told them what exactly happened, and this of course led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all of said evidence was waiting. And then Robert was obviously found guilty. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So yeah, unless you got some Tuck Everlasting water, you're gone, pal. Number 7, Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who on April 30th, 2007 was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area. And on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. So again, it's more than we think. He's been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history. And if you know anything about LA history, you'll know that's pretty f***ed up to hear. In his original trial that led to conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one, in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. Nice, just an extra one, just for fun. Just throw on a couple more. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of cases, in the end, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. So, A1 for science. We locked them up, we found out. Number 6, Jeffrey Dahmer. Of course, we have to throw in Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most well-known serial killers with his crimes taking place from 1978 to 1991. Your parents probably remember a lot of this. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel or this website, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people, I'll say that. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he himself was the devil, which was intended to, bolster his insanity plea and help him out. Again, that devil made me do it type of bullshit. His attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, and caught up in the character in the movie The Exorcist 3. Said character was Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. That'd be ironic, huh? Number 5, Sam Little. Known for being one of the worst serial killers in history, Sam has confessed to taking the lives of more than 90 people, and while authorities have only been able to for sure connect him to 30, they say they have no reason to doubt the validity of his other confessions. They're like, yeah, it probably happened. If he's saying it, sadly, it's probably the truth. Sam was able to continue on this horrible path for so many years because of the fact that he committed these crimes in different states and kept moving, right? Different counties, of course, made it difficult to connect his crimes to one another. Man was on the move. In an interview with an investigator named Sergeant LeBlanc, as they discussed religious beliefs, they spoke about the nature of sin. Now, Sam stated he had no fear of God and said that God made him this way, so why should he ask for forgiveness? He's just trying to be cool or something, try to make his life a haiku. All of a sudden we're like, no, you're just a crazy person. He said that God knew everything he did. He also allegedly told a few select people that he believed that he was the devil. There it is. See, it's always something. It's always the devil something. Devil made me blank. It's like, okay. Number 4, Arnie Johnston. Speak of the Devil. This one's definitely the most well-known one. Here we go. This one's a little bit different. It's now a cinematic adventure, apparently. This trial was well-known previously, but of course it became more widely spread as it was the trial in the newest Conjuring movie. That's what it was based off of. In 1981, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston killed 40-year-old Alan Bono in what appeared to have been a simple argument gone wrong quickly. It got way more twisted and confusing, right? When it came to his defense for the crime, he said the devil made him do it. Just like that third installment in the Conjuring franchise. The title, The Devil Made Me Do It, is in direct relation. This is not just a cool James Wan Conjuring title. This is the real case. This was the first time in history that possession has been used in an American courtroom as a defense. Pretty interesting, right? You think about it. You hear these stories often, but it has to go somewhere. It has to go to court. This was the first time that happened. Arnie had been at the scene of about 3 exorcisms that had occurred prior to his alleged possession and then his, killing. And this is why there's so many believers that believe that he's actually possessed or that the devil made him do it because he was part of these exorcisms or whatever. Because he was guilty by association, a couple exorcisms, so now he's evil apparently. At the end of the day, the jury in the trial decided to convict him of manslaughter. Number 3, Ivina Fisher. This Turkish serial killer who was responsible for taking the lives of 11 women, who were all ages between 68 and 95, absolutely horrible. He was also responsible for 6 more crimes once he was convicted that were also elderly women. So again, there's more than we initially thought. Now down the road, he eventually got caught for these horrible crimes, thankfully, and he was sentenced to 6 death sentences as well as 40 years in prison, just to make sure, just to top it off. Right? I would hope that's the case, make it 80 years. Sure, doesn't matter at that point. The point is, see you never. Get the f out of here. Now, this was back in 1995 when he was first sentenced, but cut to 2004, the death penalty in Turkey was abolished, which meant that in May 2005, Ivina Fisher was released from jail. His nickname is the Artvin Monster, and he was released from jail. Yeah, I have a nickname for him personally, but I can't say any of those words on YouTube, so I'll just save that for later. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. This is twisted. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her horrible husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped and then later killed 10 victims. They kept them and then abused them for a while, horribly, before ultimately ending their lives. Now, it really was the most twisted situation. Just disgusting people, really. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to murder and receives 16 years. Her horrible husband was waiting for execution, but he died of cancer before meeting his demise. One of those things where you're like, close, you got close. Charlene got out and moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. So one of them's dead, one of them's absolutely free, and changes her name. Yep, sleeping fair. And finally, number 1, the Zodiac Killer. Of course, this one had to make it on the list because, why, of course. There's a plethora of terrifying people on this list here, but nothing is as terrifying as an uncaught serial killer. And the Zodiac is definitely the most prolific of them all. The Zodiac Killer took the lives of 5 people in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. He was most known for targeting young couples or a lone male cab driver, one of the two. Now, despite 2 people luckily and thankfully escaping his attempted evil doings, he still has never been caught. He was one of those losers who left notes and stuff for the police to find, thought he was like a DC villain, thought he was cool. One of those psychos. While no one's ever heard from the Zodiac since 1974, the case remains active in many different countries, and maybe one day we'll finally know who the real Zodiac Killer is.
For example, our first demon is also classified as a god, Whiro. According to Maori mythology, Whiro was the broski to the light god Tane, and their parents were Papa, aka the Earth, and Rangi, aka the Sky. Like having 3 kids and a dog in a 2-bedroom apartment, the brothers and their siblings are all unhappy that mom and dad did not do enough pre-planning, and there's not enough room for all the kids. So, Tane wishes to separate their parents by forcing Rangi upward. Parents divorcing is hard enough, but when your brother's the one suggesting it? Nah, Whiro was pissed, and he was the only one in the family that didn't agree to the plan, insisting they all remain in darkness together. But he's hardcore ignored by mass majority vote, and is angered by his brother Tane's actions and suggestion that even got them there to begin with. Whiro becomes the embodiment of darkness and evil. He went on to rule the underworld and was responsible for all the crap that humans did. His demonic guidance was ceaseless and didn't end with just the living, as when a person died it was believed that upon their descent to the underworld they were eaten by Whiro. Each bit of flesh made him stronger, so that eventually he would be powerful enough to break free of the netherworld, breach the surface, and devour everything. Anyways, in the meantime, while we wait for the Whiro apocalypse, to prevent being consumed by him, you can be cremated, as gods can't gain strength from ashes. This Filipino beast will live in your head rent-free, Mananaganagal, who I will be calling calling mana because that's a tongue twister for me. According to the Aswang Project, creatures similar to mana existed throughout Southeast Asia, like the Panagal in Malaysia we'll learn about later, or the Krisu in Thailand. Multiple mythologies share common beings with this Filipino demon. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? And while it may be a beautiful woman during the day, at night mana separates from the lower half of its body and their fangs and wings give it a vampire-like appearance as she flies in search of victims with her gnarled hair and intestines trailing below her. She preys on the unsuspecting while they're asleep, with pregnant women being her ideal prey. It'll use its elongated tongue to suck out the woman's blood, organs, or even fetus, only hunting men out of lustuous desires and luring them to a private place to eat them alive, feasting on all of their organs. Now you can't just beat this chick with a broom to get her to go away, but there are a couple tricks. If sunlight hits her separated torso, she's gonna die. Or if you find her lower half while she's off hunting the night and pack the gut of it with salt and crushed garlic, she can't reattach come morning and will die. To keep the mana away from your home, you can leave pots of uncooked rice, ash, or salt around the vicinity. If they spot any of those items on your roof, they may not decide to enter because they assume if you're eating that, you probably taste like crap. You are what you eat. I'm just kidding. One of the many scorned ladies on this list is Leviev. The goddess of death and disease was the blind daughter of Tioni, the god of death, and his underworld queen, Tionitar. She is the most wretched daughter of with the blackest of heart, an evil genius of La Pala bent on unleashing the most wicked and terrible illnesses upon the mortal lands. The Kalevala, a 19th century work of poetry recognized as the national epic of Finland, references her. The blind daughter of Tioni, old and wicked witch, Leviev, worst of all deathland women, ugliest of mana children, source of all the host evils and the ills and plagues of the Northland, blah 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 blah. Imagine getting crapped on by a whole country in a slam poem. As a virginal mother of disease, Leviathar's form appears to be the exact opposite of the virginal mothers of other mythologies. Her purity seemingly meant more to highlight her repellingness to mankind. Anyways, she was believed to have become pregnant by the east wind and consequently birthed 9 sons, and they were all the vilest of diseases: consumption, colic, gout, rickets, ulcers, scab, cancer, and plague. The final son is considered the most dreadful, which is why his name does not appear in any text. Apparently, he was banished by his most wretched mother herself to become the scourge of humankind. Arachnophobia beware, Jogamono is here. Japan is one of those countries that has a gigantic backlog of lore, legends, and myths due to its extensive histories spanning back as far as 35,000 BC. Now, Jurgamo is no exception. The stories of her have been spun like webs for centuries past, going back to the Edo period of Japan. The monster is said to have the upper half of a beautiful, seductive woman with porcelain white skin and eyes and hair as dark as night. Meanwhile, from the waist down, homegirl is packing giant spider legs, and lots of them. The creature would lure thirsty-ass men into desolate shacks where once the door is closed, his fate is met, and Juro began spinning them in its web before eating them slowly alive, just like the real spiders. The legend also claims that Juro are born when a spider reaches 400 years old, as it acquires transformative abilities through magic, which has me ready to Google how to tell spiders' ages anytime I see one now. Even more terrifying are the stories of Juro appearing as a normal person to a passerby, presenting strangers with what seems like a baby in a blanket, and when the blanket's open, it's a nest full of spiders' eggs that explode and engulf the subject alive. May you listen to your mother should La Llorona take you to her watery depths. Though there are many variations in La Llorona's start, it remains that she was a beautiful woman named Maria, whose husband began courting or messing around with someone else. She's blinded by her rage, her despair, and commits an unspeakably heinous act at the river, one where she comes to too late. Realizing what she'd done in her grief, Maria takes her own life by drowning as well. Her soul is unable to go to the afterlife until she finds the souls of her children. She's cursed to go after the children of the living, hoping one day to find the correct souls and be free. Now she wanders along riverside, screaming, crying, and calling out them for some love, for someone. But don't be mistaken with pity. This woman is cursed by her horrible deed, and her ill intent remains alive even if she does not. She steals children to add to her watery arsenal, a void she cannot fill, one caused by her own selfish decision, now leaving them to be lost forever. Similar to our second demon, Mana, it makes you wonder how so many far apart places had the same experience, whether as La Llorona in Mexico, or in Nicaragua as La Novia de Tola, or Venezuela as La Sayona. There's many stories of the weeping woman who's scorned by her lover so she may dispose of her own children and self, then be cursed to haunt the lands and steal life from the living. This ain't a pony ride you want to take. The Kelpie. The last time I wrote about a Kelpie before this script was actually a middle school essay. I was a mythology obsessed kid who got to choose their own topic, so it's kind of crazy to see how this came back around for me after a decade. The Kelpie is a shape-changing aquatic spirit of Scottish legend. Its name may derive from the Scottish Gaelic word meaning heifer or colt, as Kelpies are said to to haunt rivers and streams, usually in the shape of a horse. But this ain't no show pony. It's black as night with rows of fangs and opalescent pupilless eyes. Its feet are said to be webbed, and it's said that its tail entering the water is to resemble the sound of thunder. And if you're passing by a river and hear an unearthly wail or howling, take care. It could be a kelpie warning of an approaching storm. It's a particularly attractive creature to children, luring them onto its back where its sticky magic hides will glue them down so they can't dismount. Then the kelpie will trot itself happily back into the water and have a feast below. But there is some good news. A kelpie has a weak spot, and it's its bridle. Anyone who can get a hold of a kelpie's bridle will have command over it and any other kelpie. A captive kelpie is said to have the strength of at least 10 horses, so see what you guys can manage. This creature is the reason Zulus were bunk bedding it. It's the Tokoloshe. Sometimes they're described as small humanoid creatures like gremlins or gnomes, and other times they're described as more bulbous and fleshy with a piggish or apish quality. These South African demons are always malevolent, but what on this list isn't, you know? They are said to crawl into sleeping people's rooms and cause all kinds of havoc, from simply scaring them all the way to choking them with their long bony fingers. Bony fingers that they love to scratch and poke with, leaving marks all over your body. One way to keep the Tokoloshe at bay is to put bricks underneath the legs of your bed. This will put you out of reach of the short creatures and hopefully out of harm's way. If it continues to torment, a Zulu Sagbona is called, and they exorcise the area and the home. There might actually be a very real terrifying reason for the creation of this creature. Let's back up the sleeping arrangements quickly. As mentioned, raised beds are an important way to combat them. Traditionally, many South Africans slept on grass mats on the ground around the fire on winter night. However, healthy people would inexplicably be found dead come morning. Why? Well, the Tokoloshe, of course. But there's a theory that sleeping close to the fire in their homes may have depleted the oxygen levels and filled their home with carbon dioxide. As it is heavier than pure air, it would sink to the bottom where people slept. Thus, if you put things under your bed and rise it, there's a better chance of waking up alive in the morning. Raise your bed, now you're not dead. The Penagalan. These bad boys are what I was referring to in our second point, similar to manas. They are infamous mythological creatures known by different names throughout Southeast Asia. In Malaysian myth, the Penagalan was once a mortal woman who performed witchcraft with a witch by agreeing to become vegetarian for 40 days in exchange for youthful beauty. Ultimately, she passed a McDonald's at 2 a.m. after a night of tequila and smelt the chicken nuggets and folded, breaks her vegetarian pack, eats some meat for some reason, and gets instant karma. Cursed to be a flesh-eating Penagalan. During the day, she would resemble an ordinary woman, but at night her head would detach from her body, floating around and trailing her entrails and spine under it. This disembodied head would fly around like a demented helium balloon on the run, searching for sustenance in the form, once again, of pregnant women and infants, draining them of their blood. And any of those fed on by this vampiric creature usually ended up contracting diseases, if not dying. Returning to her abode before dawn, the Penagalan would soak her dangly organs and veins and spines and stuff in vinegar, shrink them back to size, and fit them back in her body. A Penagalan therefore could be recognized during the day by the telltale smell of strong vinegar. It's one demon that encompasses a lot of demons, the Jambi. Jambi is a name given to the most nefarious creatures in Caribbean mythology, and there are many different types of Jambi, each a reflection of the Caribbean's diverse makeup of African, Amerindian, East Indian, Dutch, and English people and the lore that they carried with them there. The creatures themselves cast dark, shadowy figures and are much more sinister than the average ghost. For example, there's the Bakujam. Resembling a leprechaun, it rewards its owner with wealth or wishes at the price of constant supply of milk and bananas. Bakus are mischievous as well as intelligent, devious, behaving like a poltergeist by moving items and pelting rocks at home. A moon gazer Jambi only comes out at full moon and is an unusually tall, muscular man always standing on the road or the edges of the cliff under a full moon, foot on either side and hands on the hip. Anyone who tries to pass will be crushed to death as he quickly closes his legs. The Churil Jambi is an East Indian origin and the evil spirit of a woman who died in childbirth. Tormented by separation from her child, she haunts and terrorizes pregnant women and newborn babies. A Churil resembles a human woman, but their feet are turned backwards and their features are sometimes upside down. To protect yourself from Jambis, there's a few general tricks. Leave a heap of rice outside your door. It forces them to count every grain before the sun rises. They can't cross water, so if you're being chased, go for a dive. If you walk backwards into your house at night, it can stop them from entering too. And last but not least, please don't curse me for it, is Lamashtu. Demons and monsters are arguably synonymous nowadays, but in Mesopotamia it was anything but, as demons are entities separate in nature from the gods and humans, taking either non-human forms or being shapeless, materialized by the wind. Thus, demon versus daemon, two different things. According to folklore, Lamashtu is the daughter daughter of Anu, the Sumerian lord of the sky. She had feet like that of an eagle and very long fingernails and a bunch of body hair. She had the head of a lion and the ears and teeth of a donkey. And she was a big ol' B-word for no reason to, just inherent evil and rage. She attacked pregnant women, mothers, and babies. She would touch a pregnant woman's stomach 7 times and the pregnancy would wither. She would kidnap newborns while they were breastfeeding and have them for her own. And her favorite meal aside from bones was human flesh topped off with boiling blood. Fittingly, her name is Akkadian for she who erases. However, as vile as eating children is, Lamashtu enacted various other evil deeds. Really covered all the bases. She disturbed the sleep, brought nightmares, killed nature, polluted rivers. When she wasn't wrecking the environment, she messed up bodies. She bound the muscles of men, caused pregnant women to have issues with their pregnancy, and brought disease and sickness. Amulets like the one pictured depicted the lion head bird-clawed Lamashtu and were worn by expectant mothers to defend themselves against her. Despite her dark supremacy, Lamashtu had a weakness. The plague bringer. I'm not gonna say that word. The weakness, the plague bringer. P.A. You guys can figure out the rest. You're not supposed to say this name, so I have no intention to do so. Sure, he was evil too, bringing famine and drought, and he was summoned by women to protect them from the true evil, which was Lamashtu. It's unknown whether he did this because he felt sympathy for the expecting mothers, or simply hated the demoness no matter how much she loved him. And meanwhile, she stays in love, he stays hating, and they stay toxic.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Luis Garavito. Luis gained a nickname from the media of the Beast, and I think that's a great indication of the nature of his atrocious crimes. He is said to be one of the worst serial killers in the entire world, and it is believed that his victim count is up in the 300s range, which is absolutely shocking. He confessed to 147 crimes and he was found guilty on 139 of those counts, which put his sentence at 1,853 years. But here's the thing, this trial took place in Colombia, where he lives, and there is a law, or was a law, which puts the maximum sentence to 30 years. He was sentenced in 1999, meaning there's really only a few years left of this sentence. He also had years taken off of his sentence because he assisted police in the search to recover some of the victims' bodies, which means that just this year, in 2023, he is eligible for parole. Okay, that's great. According to Luis himself, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have William Bonin. This horrible person is said to be responsible for taking the lives of 21 young men in Southern California from May of 1979 to June of 1980. It is said that on at least 12 of these occasions he was assisted by one of his 4 known accomplices, and it is even speculated that he might be responsible for 15 more of these crimes that evidence hasn't officially been able to connect him to. He was often referred to as the freeway killer because of the fact that most of the bodies were found along the freeway of Southern California. The police surveilled William until they could catch him in the act, which they did. In the beginning, he claimed innocence, but after receiving an impassioned letter from one of the victim's mothers, which asked him to please share the location of her son's body, he confessed his guilt. But he made sure to clarify that it wasn't so the mother could be at peace and her pain could be eased. No, of course not. Instead, he said, quote, "I was dying for a hamburger and I knew if I went out with the cops, they would get me a hamburger." Right, just gonna take a moment and let that sink in. At his first trial, the prosecutor described him as, quote, "the most arch-evil person who ever existed." William was convicted on 14 of his crimes and was sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row before his sentence was carried out in 1996. In our number 8 spot today, we have Robert Hansen. Robert is often referred to as the Butcher Baker, and his story truly is horrific. He is one of the most prolific serial killers in Alaska's history because for over a decade he would kidnap women and bring them into the wilderness where he would then stalk them like prey. The reason he got away with his crimes for so long is because outside of these horrifying crimes, he was just a soft-spoken baker. Robert was heading to church by day and prowling the streets by night. What led to the downfall of this horrible monster was a badass named Cindy Paulson, who was able to escape from Robert and was sure to leave evidence behind. She then went to authorities and told them what happened, and this led to a search warrant for Robert's property, which is where all the evidence they needed lied. Robert is believed to have taken the lives of of at least 17 women, and in 1983 he was sentenced to 461 years and a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In our number 7 spot today, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a much higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old. Of course, people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone might actually be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mevacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicki, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found those people rude or quote, too demanding. Okay? Vicki, get a different job then. I don't know. In our number 6 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared just like a happy couple of harmless hippies. We all know, though, not to judge a book by its cover, in the end they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco held so many witches. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked with on a farm because they said that he was a demon. The final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life. Neither of them have ever shown any kind of remorse for what they've done. In our number 5 spot today, we have Stephen Griffiths. This is a person who is said to have idolized the Yorkshire Ripper, so I'm sure what comes next will be no surprise. Stephen was a PhD student who wanted to achieve fame, but through the most sinister way possible. Between June of 2009 and May of 2010, he would go on to take the lives of 3 separate women. His criminal history was also extremely concerning, as years ago he had been arrested due to an unprovoked attack on a grocery store manager, and it is said that he previously stated that he saw himself becoming a serial killer. Shortly after he was arrested for his crimes, CCTV footage emerged that showed him celebrating after taking the life of his final victim. The footage showed him holding up a crossbow and giving the finger directly to the camera. It is said that Stephen pled guilty to his crimes once caught, not because he was remorseful, but because he wanted to receive the recognition for them. In our number 4 spot today, we have Joanna Denny. This is the person responsible for a series of killings and attacks that took place in March of 2013. Joanna is a very cold and very heartless person and has on many occasions been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her, and they used CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things about this story that make it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she really is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it quite clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involved the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. In our number 3 spot today, we have Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Elizabeth is a former registered nurse and serial who is responsible for taking the lives of 8 and attempting to take the lives of another 6 senior citizens who were under her care. With a total of 14 victims that either passed away or were harmed by her actions, she is now one of the worst serial killers Canada has ever seen. And not to mention how she was doing these things to vulnerable people that she was supposed to have devoted her life to taking care of. Her first victim who passed away was James Silcox, who was 84 in 2007 and was a World War II veteran. She committed her crimes by injecting insulin into her patients. In September of 2016, Liz ended up entering herself into a drug rehabilitation program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which is located here in Toronto. It was here that she ended up confessing to her horrific crimes. Of course, the staff at the hospital notified the proper authorities, and she was subsequently arrested, and she gave police a 2-hour confession. She admitted to knowing what she did was wrong, but she also just said that she had urges she couldn't control. She stated that, quote, God or the devil or whatever wanted me to do it. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison, but because of the way that the Canadian system works, she will at some point be eligible for parole, and hopefully denied, alright? In our number 2 spot today, we have Kevin Davis. The story behind this killer is truly one of the most disturbing things I have ever heard in my entire life. Kevin Davis was 18 years old when he took the life of his own mother. It seems as though there was some sort of conversation beforehand that had made him upset, which of course is never a good enough reason to do something like this, but there are details about this crime I wish that I could just unlearn. In an interview with police, he gives them an extremely detailed account of basically everything that happened and seems to show absolutely no remorse at all. It is chilling, it is disgusting, and it is honestly just horrific. During his trial, a doctor did testify to say that he had a personality disorder, but that he also fully knew the difference between right and wrong, and knew that his crime was wrong, and that there were no medical diagnosis that could justify his actions. Kevin is still in jail, where he will most likely spend the rest of his life, but he will become eligible for parole in 2044. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Axeman of New Orleans. Unfortunately, this is not the name of some terrible horror flick, and instead it's the moniker given to a terrible, unidentified serial killer. This person was active in New Orleans, Louisiana, and its surrounding areas from May of 1918 to October 1919. As the name implies, those who were targeted by this person were usually attacked with an axe, and it usually was one that actually belonged to the victims themselves. Many people believe that this person may have been targeting people of Italian descent because this was a theme among the victims, and some also believe that he was mainly targeting women and only took the lives of men when they tried to intervene. This is actually somewhat supported by the homes where women were killed but men weren't. In the end, although this person is responsible for taking at least 12 lives, exactly who the Axeman is or was remains a mystery.
This doctor can only prescribe doom. It's Dr. Harold Shipman. Shipman has been a well-respected and liked general practitioner and considered a pillar of the community, the way that all good serial killers are, until another GP surgeon began to get suspicious of Shipman's patients having a high mortality rate. It was then revealed that Shipman had been killing dozens of his patients, actually 215 to 250 to be precise, and had done so for years, almost completely undetected. In fact, some believe his count may actually be closer to 500. Shipman killed remorselessly, but it's likely he only ever did it for kicks and thrills and knowing he was getting away with it. Shipman was caught after suspicions being raised after a will from one of his patients he killed cited him as the sole heir, cutting out her own family. Shipman forged this will, his ego thinking somehow he'd get away with it. Of course it would make sense for a stranger to leave her whole life to me, her doctor she has no personal relationship with. I'm me, I'm perfect. Shipman was found guilty for 15 murders and 1 count of fraud, being sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, and he took his own life in a cell in 2004, never confessing to his crimes or giving a reason for all the overcompensating granny theft. Fire festival, but make it 16th century. The Batavia. Alright, so this has some Lord of the Flies energy for sure. The Batavia was a ship bound for the West Indies carrying 341 people, a mix of civilians, soldiers, and working men. So tensions are high from day one. Lot of dudes, not many chicks, no firm leading hand to guide the ship socially, and then wham! Ship crashes on June 4th of 1629. They had managed to rescue some of the provisions from the wreck, including barrels of biscuits and some water, but the commander Pyle sat and some crew ditch these 268 other losers and go find fresh water and help, which takes them 33 days to reach. In the meantime, those 33 days on the island are enough for Cornelius to decide to build a weird empire. Firstly, he tricks a party into believing that water could be found on the Seals Island. Upon landing there in their little ship, the group found no water. Cornelius then sends his henchmen to finish them off. Next, he drowned people by sending them out in boats on useless errands where his accomplices would push them overboard. Then, he instructed a group of soldiers under the command of Weeb Hayes to go explore the High Island. Before they left, he confiscated all their arms. He didn't expect them to return. After all, that was the same direction which Pelsat had gone 30-some days ago, and he never came back. Lo and behold, a smoke signal means Hayes did find water, which complicates matters for Cornelius. He was in danger of them warning any approaching rescue ship of his Lord of the Flies actions he'd been doing. He tries to woo Hayes over to the dark side. Hayes says, "Nah bro, island living." So Cornelius tries to duke it out and loses spectacularly to Hayes, who locks his ass up. Pelsat takes 63 days to find the wreck site again, almost double the time it took the ship's boat to get to Batavia. When he arrives, he learned of Cornelius had killed and pilfered and enslaved those around him and condemned the mutineers to have their right hands cut off. In the case of Cornelius, both, before being put to death on gallows. Double trouble with these sisters, Delphine and Maria de Jesus Gonzalez. Doesn't that just roll off the tongue? At least a lot better than most prolific murder partnership, which is the title given by the Guinness World of Records in a dubious honor to their horrific 91 known slayings. They shopped from home, pulling victims from the brothel El Rancho de Angel that they ran in Mexico. There's not much information on the Gonzalez family, despite the fact that the sisters were actually caught alongside their two other sisters who were seen as accomplices, and that their crimes were committed in the 21st century, where police and scientific progress can provide a lot more detail. The police picked up a woman named Josefina Gutierrez, a procuress, on suspicion of devious behavior in the Guantero area, and during questioning, she implicated the two sisters' crimes. Police officers searched the sisters' property and found the bodies of 11 men and 80 women, a total of over 91 people. Investigations revealed the sisters' scheme was that of to recruit women through help wanted ads, though the ads would state the girls would become maids for the two sisters, not adult services in a brothel. Many of the girls are force-fed substances once they arrived, and the sisters reportedly killed the girls when they became too ill, too physically damaged, lost their looks, or stopped pleasing customers. They would also do anything to customers that showed up with large amounts of cash, asked too many questions, saw too many of their girls, or were just kicking it around too much. And when asked for an explanation for deaths of family and friends, one sister reportedly said to People the food didn't agree with them. Both received 40-year sentences in 1964. This would probably be the worst plumbing call to ever receive, so let's visit Dennis Nilsen. As a miserable junior constable in London, he began to drink alone in the evenings and began visiting gay bars where he engaged in casual liaisons with other men, having fought the long fight of accepting his own sexual identity. A year later, he left the police and began to work as a civil servant in a job center. Between the years of 1978 and 1983, Dennis Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 men and is believed to have attempted on further 7 people. At first, Nilsen kept the bodies under the floorboards of his Melrose apartment until they had decomposed too much to gain gratification from, and they emitted the gnarly scent of rotten person that attracted insects. He therefore decided to burn all of them in a bonfire in his garden, disguising the smell with a melting car tire too. In mid-1981, Nilsen's landlord decided to renovate the ground floor apartment, offering him $1,000 to vacate, which he happily accepted before burning the last few bodies he was retaining. Dennis moved to 23 Cranley Gardens in London, where he went from a floorboard storage to attempting to dispose of flesh organs and smaller bones by shoving them down a toilet. Seeing as toilets can't even handle a tampon, it consequently blocked all the pipes, which surprisingly led to Nilsen himself calling an emergency draining company. Imagine that poor employee looking down the toilet bowl and having an eyeball look back. That's essentially what happened too. When the plumber noticed the blockage, human remains, and immediately called the police, putting an end to Dennis Nilsen's murder spree. Hotel Hell was also called the H.H. Holmes Hotel, and it was literally built with the single goal of killing folks for sport. My American Horror Story fans may know, but this legendary building is the inspiration for their season Hotel, alongside the Cecil, of course. While it remains unknown how many people Holmes killed in this house of horrors, he once boasted of killing 27. However, some estimates claim the actual number could have been as low as 9 or as high as 200. Like I said, there ain't much info. For his mansion, H.H. Holmes planned the first floor to contain an entire block of storefronts that he'd be able to rent out to the flood of new businesses opening in the city. The third floor would contain apartments for new residents looking to make it in the big windy city. Eerily, for some of those unsuspecting residents, they may have eventually become Holmes' victims. Those victims got to see the second floor, one that was a allegedly full of asphyxiation chambers and mazes and hidden stairs. There were hinged walls and false partitions. Some rooms had 5 doors and others had none. Secret airless chambers were found underneath floorboards, and iron plate-lined walls appeared to stifle all sound. The first clue about this bizarre floor plan's true purpose came to the cops in a pile of bones. And when the authorities descended into the cellar, the scope of the building's hidden horrors were revealed. Beside a blood-soaked operating table, they found women's clothes, surgical surfaces, a crematorium, and an array of medical tools and bizarre devices. For the most part, Holmes represented himself at his trial, displaying his classic grace and a remarkable familiarity with the law, according to one paper at the time. However, his charm wasn't enough for the jurors, and he unanimously was sentenced to death. This is the strangest thing on our countdown by a long shot: the horse. It's a rare kind of story that manages to walk that fine line between disturbing and hilarious. The Em & Claw horse intercourse case was a series of incidents in 2005 involving Kenneth Pinion, James Michael Tate, and other unidentified men. So you may be wondering, hey Teresa, how does this actually even happen? Great question. So, it starts when Pinion loses his ability to experience certain sensation in the body after a motorcycle accident, and he began to seek out sexual extremism to fill that void. The internet's a deep and scary place, and on there, Pinion finds a community of men called zoos who would meet up in farms for communal weekends of animal fun. They train the horses to participate even, and I'm not going to tell you how. Research this nightmare yourself. Pinion is killed on a farm northwest of Em & Claw, according to Governor John Urquhart of the sheriff's office. He said that typically the men were horsing around with the same horse on the property of James Michael Tate, but on this particular night, it's my understanding the horse wasn't particularly receptive, so the men had to go elsewhere. Having snuck into a barn and gotten up to whatever they do, Pinion sustains internal injuries from this not usual horse and is dropped off naked from a speeding car in front of Em & Claw Community Hospital on July 2nd of 2005, where he's declared deceased on site from colon perforation. Reported in the Seattle Times, it was one of the paper's most read stories of 2005. Pinion's death was rapidly prompted to enact the bill of Washington State Legislature that prohibits both intercourse with animals and the videotaping of such an act, with jail time and fines as penalties. Persecutors also later determined that the horses hadn't been injured. Meet the real-life Jigsaw toy box killer. David Ray Parker became known as the toy box killer following the chilling discovery of a sadistic chamber in 1999. Dude went full Jigsaw before any of the horror movies even happened. He soundproofed a truck trailer, which he called his toy box, where he tortured and assaulted victims, telling them exactly what he was going to do to them in explicit detail while they were restrained, and he even went as far as putting mirrors on the ceiling and walls because he wanted them to see what was happening. He didn't even kill all of his victims. Rather, when he was done with some of them, he would heavily dose them with an intensely powerful drug and then drop them somewhere. One of his victims actually didn't remember what happened at all and thought she was having horrific reoccurring nightmares until she finally put the pieces together and realized what would happen, and no one believed her. It's estimated he killed up to 60 victims in New Mexico. Many of the bodies were never recovered as they were and dumped in undisclosed locations. Parker also made recordings of his victims' demise and showed no remorse for his crimes, explaining it was a source of entertainment that made me create these tapes. His final intended victim luckily managed to escape with her life after 3 days of agony and report David to police. What can only be described as despicable, the hi-fi slayings. They still shock today, and honestly they could probably top this list and really any others when it comes to true evil human beings. In 1974, 3 men, Dale Selby, William Andrew, and Keith Roberts, entered Hi-Fi Shop in Ogden just before closing time, holding store workers 20-year-old Stanley Walker and 18-year-old Michelle Ansley hostage in the basement as they robbed the store. 16-year-old Byron Nasbitt enters the store with impeccably wrong timing as he was running errands and was also taken hostage. Both Byron's mother, Carolyn Peterson Nasbitt, and Stanley father's Orrin Walker arrive at the store to look for their children who had yet to return for over an hour. Now they suffered the same captive fate. What happened is unimaginable and some of the most unnecessary human violence that has ever happened. The robbers forced the group to drink corrosive drain cleaner in an ill attempt to end their lives. All it does is cause them agony and screams. This is the breaking point for it falling apart, and the robbers panicked and really lost control. Their attempted methods of killing hostages became bizarre and more ineffective. They shot at them, they brought a pen into the mix and put it through someone's ear. They just ended up choosing to finish loading the van and leave. That's right, they just leave. There's no police outside forcing them to do all this. There's no need to kill these people other than panic. The 2 surviving victims sustained permanent life-changing injuries, and these twisted killers were executed by lethal injection. The otaku killer may genuinely not have had a soul. His one true companion was his grandfather, so when he died, it wasn't totally strange to his family that Miyazaki transformed. Just not to this extreme. They reported he had begun spying on his little sisters, and then he attacked them when he was confronted about it. At one point, he even attacked his mother for an argument they had. Miyazaki then admitted that he had eaten some of his grandfather's ashes after he'd been cremated in order to feel closer with him. In August of 1988, just one day after his 26th birthday, he abducts his first victim, Mary Kano. For several weeks, the body decomposes, and then he checks in on it periodically. Eventually, he removed parts of it to keep at home. He would also call her family and breathe deeply into the phone. Later, he sent them a note and a box full of their daughter's bone dust. When the police announced this on the news, he sends them another taunting letter. His second victim is abducted in October of 1988 and again left the body in the woods while he took the victim's clothing with him. Within the next 8 months, the killer would escalate to 2 more, and they would go missing in the same manners. Otaku would drink their blood and sometimes dine on their remains. The otaku killer was finally apprehended when he was attempting his 5th kidnapping. The girl's older sister tells their father of a strange man, and the father goes and quite literally jumps Miyazaki to save his daughter. Mia gets away but idiotically returns to the park where his car was, and the police ambush him. Miyazaki, who retained a perpetually calm, collected demeanor throughout his trial, appeared indifferent to his capture. When asked about his crimes, he blamed them on the Rat Man, an alter ego that lived inside him and forced him to do terrible things. He was given death penalty in 2008. The uncaught offender of California. Once unnamed, Joseph James D'Angelo was found to be the face of the original Night Stalker, an uncaught serial offender for a long series of home invasions in Sacramento in 1976. He's actually responsible for at least 3 separate crime sprees throughout the state, each of which spawned different nicknames in the press before it became evident they were committed by one person. The Visalia Ransacker, Earons, the Night Stalker, followed by the original Night Stalker since Ramirez came along and snatched up that jazzy title. He frequently breaks into homes in the daytime prior to committing the attack and would do things like unload the household weapons, leave pieces of rope, remove screens from windows, cut phone lines. He'd also call the victims before and after their attacks. He was known for his taunting and threatening of both victims and police in obscene phone calls and written communications, and one of the more chilling instances is at a community meeting in Sacramento regarding the attacks. A man stands up and declares he would protect his wife if the attacker came into their home next. Lo and behold, that couple is victimized next. He was there and must have followed them home. In 1978, he begins attacking all throughout Northern California, and then in 79, he vanishes. In the late 1990s, DNA revealed he moved to Southern California and became a starting December of 79 there. He committed 10 murders and ranged from the Goleta to Dana Point region. On April 24th of 2018, the state of California charged the 72-year-old with 8 counts of first degree based upon DNA evidence. Investigators identified members of D'Angelo's family through forensic genealogy. D'Angelo couldn't be charged with his 1970s essays, but he was charged with the 2018 ones and 13 kidnappings and abduction attempts.
Number 10, Jack the Ripper. If we were to pick a poster boy for this list, well, it'd be him. Jack the Ripper was the alias given to the unknown criminal with sick tastes. During a period in the late 1800s, there was a string of cold-blooded de-lifings that affected London. Victorian London, to be specific. It got so bad that they were telling people not to go out at night in fear of the Ripper. Ooh, that does not sound good. His crimes were extremely graphic and violent and meant for a much more mature and suitable audience. Just to make things even worse, he was never caught, or really even fully identified. Some of the theories say he was a she, he was multiple people, or even Prince Albert. I thought it was Prince Albert at one point. They really don't know. Oh, that's terrible. That's just awful. Right, I'll go out with you, but your Ripper could be out. Number 9, Charles Bravo. Mr. Bravo succumbed to his illness in 1876. He had been poisoned with antimony, which at first when I read that, I thought I said alimony, and I feel like a lot of husbands died of that. That's a divorce joke for everybody at home. With antimony, which is a poison that works very, very slowly. Slowly enough that he would have known what was happening. Thus, he quite possibly knew who did it, but never revealed who did. Now, at the time, it was believed to be a manual checkout, if you will. What's crazy about this case, though, is that it's like a game of Clue. The wife was having an affair with a doctor, so there was something there. There was also a disgruntled maid who all wanted a piece of Mr. Bravo. Yes. The family fun game night conclusion was it was the wife in the library with the candlestick. I meant the poison. She poisoned him. It was her with the poison. We think. That's the running theory. We still don't know. Number 8. Thames Torso. The Thames River is famous for being a stinky, rotten, no good, very bad river filled with the most heinous refuse humans have to offer. That's right, love. It's awful, isn't it? Oh, it's bloody awful. So, to some, it shouldn't be a surprise that in September of 1873, a woman's torso was recovered from the river. Hold on to your barf bag, folks, because it's only gonna get worse from here. There was also lungs, a right thigh, a right shoulder, and lastly, a scalp of the face, and it is attached. It is gross. Ooh, they found that as well. Authorities did their best to reconstruct the body, but this isn't a Malibu plastic surgery office. They even sat out the face on display in hopes the public could identify the victim. One man suspected it was his missing daughter, but a positive ID could not be made. Thus, we know nothing about the case. Number 7. The Gattons. In 1898, adult siblings Michael, Nora, and Ellen Murphy were on their way home Boxing Day after an entertaining day out. They made their way home after a dance had been cancelled. And sometimes that happens, but they still made the best of it, and you know what? I respect that. Enjoy your life. Enjoy the afternoon. That's awesome. However, they never made it home. Their bodies were discovered in a grisly, bloody scene. I mean, really bad. Skulls were crushed, bodies were beaten, and someone had done in the horse. I mean, they shot the horse. That's crazy. No witnesses, I guess. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the siblings. It's really scary. Number 6. Edwin Bartlett. Edwin Bartlett, like many other people in the Victorian era, was in need of a good dentist. I could use one too. I need braces. I'll be so cute with braces. A lack of dental hygiene made for many issues back then. So, if you take away anything from this list today, folks, it's brush your teeth and go see your dentist. It's important. Well, he went to the dentist because his breath had been so bad he had to sleep in separate beds from his wife. He had so much buildup and gunk in there. It was that bad. Gross. For me, it's because I fart in my sleep, or at least so I'm told. That's what everyone says. I don't know. At the time, Mrs. Bartlett asked her husband to pick up a large portion of chloroform because that was legal back then. You just pick up some chloroform. Okay, sure. What a time to be alive. He later was found with chloroform in his system, a large amount. The missus somehow convinced the court that she was innocent. A study done almost 100 years later confirmed it was her. Well, at least maybe it was her. We're, again, still not sure because it was so long ago. Number 5. Harriet Boozwell. Christmas morning 1872 was a good morning for everyone waking up except Harriet Boozwell, who was found carved up like a Christmas goose. Oh god. The night before, she had attended a fancy Christmas ball, as you do back then, and she was seen leaving with a well-dressed, handsome man, a foreigner, most likely German, as witnesses report. She was found the next day with multiple lacerations, and yeah, it wasn't pretty. The police eventually followed a trail of evidence to a German man in South America, but because of the man's pleasant demeanor and solid alibi, he was dropped as a suspect, even though his maid claims of cleaning a bloody handkerchief that night of her passing. No one else was ever arrested for the crime, and that was the end of that one. Oh yeah, the bloody handkerchief? Yeah, that was my brother. I had nothing to do with that. Yeah, it was not me. Sorry. Number 4. Elizabeth Jackson. Surprise, surprise! Another mangled corpse was found in the River Thames. That's weird. This time, the lower half of a woman and legs. As the days went on, more and more parts were discovered, and after another bad glue and paste project, it was identified to be Elizabeth Jackson, a young woman who had left her home in shame of an unwedded pregnancy. Ooh, scandalous. Sadly, she ended up in River Thames, and no one is sure who did it at all. Some claim actually it was Jack the Ripper, and while it does make sense, experts don't all agree. Thus, it is another unsolved mystery. God, why is it happening so much back then? What the hell's going on? God. Number 3, Lizzie Borden. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. That's a nice nurse. What a nice thing to say about a nice young lady. Maybe one of the most famous crimes ever, actually. In a nutshell, it looked like Lizzie had done it. It was a closed and shut case. It seemed like a pretty concrete open and shut case. But yet again, somehow, somehow she got off free. She claimed that she was in the barn when it happened, and then she discovered the bodies. Now, most of the topics on this list are a whodunit, but I mean, for sure this one, we can't be so serious to not ignore the facts here, right? I mean, she was the only person there. Who could have done it? Well, unsolved apparently. Oh god, alright, she didn't do it. Number 2, the West Ham vanishings. Just east of London between the years of 1882 and 1899, a few women disappeared and they were left in parks, or at least their bodies were. I don't know why that keeps happening. It's 1800s is weird. And while we don't know very much about Jack the Ripper, we know even less about these cases, as they've somewhat fallen into obscurity. Naturally, police thought it could be Jack the Ripper again, but it's also likely that it's not. I'm starting to think Victorian London isn't the safest place for a lady to be. I don't like this is going. That's all the information on that one. It was like, yeah, they died, we don't know who did it. Oh, okay. Alright. I'll put that in. Number 1, Carrie Brown. This one takes place in 1881 Manhattan. Carrie Brown was found deceased in a hotel room. A man named Amir Abi was arrested and spent 11 years in jail for the crime, before being proven innocent and released. So what's so crazy about this whole thing? Well, given the same style, the running theory was that again, this was Jack the Ripper, even though this was New York and not London. So the question is really, who did Carrie in? And if it was Jack the Ripper, why is he in New York, and how many more did he really commit in London and New York? Man, that's scary, dude. I don't know. Number 10, Alcatraz. It's the 1930s, and organized crime and gangsters have ruled over the city streets of America for at least a decade. At first, the crooks and wealthy gangsters were idolized for their lavish lifestyles and sticking it to the man attitude. Literally. A lot of these criminals are too wealthy and powerful to be caught, and all the smaller ones, well, they organize jailbreaks. A surprising amount, to be honest. Well, what if there was a place that was so inescapable, so dangerous, even for the most dangerous and lucrative criminal? Well, that's what Alcatraz was. A place for the most rotten, no-good criminals. And it was an example to others out there that Uncle Sam wasn't fooling around. Hence why Al Capone was sent there. And in case you were wondering, it wasn't a 5-star hotel. Surrounded by rough waters in San Francisco Bay, it was a fortress and a maximum security prison. Number 9, The Pillory. As an actor, my greatest fear would be an audience that's turned on me. And they've reached for their summer fresh ripe tomatoes and have launched them onto stage left where I am reciting Shakespeare monologues quite poorly. Maybe that was just a fever dream, but what isn't a fever dream is humiliating someone in a pillory. Used back in ye olde times as a form of humiliation punishment, a means of exposing one to ridicule and embarrassment. Mind you, the design itself leaves you fairly vulnerable as both your head and arms are locked up in a not very comforting position. Something like this, it's not good, you don't like that. This is where the town can ridicule you. Name calling, spitting, slapping, and the aforementioned tomato toss. No thank you, I don't even like tomatoes. Not a big fan of tomatoes. Number 8. Tamashigiri, feudal Japan, a land of isolation, haikus, and cherry blossom trees in the divine wind. Speaking of divine wind, no, I'm just kidding. Oh, to be there and witness the art and majesty of the time. For me, and I'm sure a lot of others at home, the coolest part about feudal Japan is samurais, the knights for hire who became so powerful they basically became their own government. Pretty cool. While the samurai used a handful of different blades and tactics, none is more famous than the katana. Curved swords forged with great care and patience. The end result is a blade that's not only tough as steel, but can cut through just about any soft target. So after a blade was completed, it needed to be tested. Makes sense. The art of tamashigiri is taking criminals, crooks, and sadly oftentimes innocent folks and seeing how well a katana could lob off a limb. If it works, you have yourself a blade worthy of a Jedi. If not, well, back to the drawing board. No blood loss here. Well, actually a lot. Number 7, electric chair. Ever seen The Green Mile? Yeah, I have a fear of electricity and sponges now too. The electric chair was a popular sentence in the early to mid 20th century for the truly awful and interesting members of our society. But after years of controversial use and horror, we no longer use it. Oh wait, just kidding, it's actually still used today. Now, I'm not here to make a statement on capital punishment, but imagine being in court and the judge looks at you and says, you know what? You look like you could use 2,000 volts at around 12 amps running through your body. Which, for all DIY electricians at home, is enough to make your self-wiring project your last. So, Stay out of court. Number 6, Vlad the Impaler. You gotta love Vlad. Here you got a king and leader of a small European kingdom that is constantly being targeted by members of the previous dynasty who want him gone, and foreign invaders frothing at the mouth to take over his kingdom. Vlad, however, wasn't going to take any of this laying down. Vlad amassed his army and did his best to defend his kingdom. However, it's his horrible scare tactics that have him on this list, as anyone he caught that was thought to be an enemy of the state was impaled on a large wooden stake through the hindquarters. Ouch. And like the worst Christmas decoration ever, he left those poor saps on display for any who question his authority. There should be a field full of people on spikes. That's... oof. No thanks. Number 5, the National Razor. Once the National Razor had been busted out to get rid of King Louis and Marie Antoinette, well, it simply couldn't be put away. Like an ocarina song that you can't remember. That menu stays open for a while. I don't remember the songs. Now, when an autocratic leadership like the French monarch was, collapses, it creates a power vacuum. Plus, the country was starving and about to go to war, so they were trying times to say the least. So how do we quell the royalist movement and keep the revolution alive? Said Robespierre. I know. Let's bring out the National Razor on overdrive. Ooh, good idea. During a short time period, thousands of people met their end to the guillotine for anti-revolution behavior, right up until Robespierre also met his end the same way for anti-revolution behavior. But at that time, anything could be anti-revolution behavior, so a lot of people off of the head. Number 4, the Brazen Bull. It's ancient Greece, and you're tired of the same old punishments and sentencing. Oh, so bored of everything. That's when someone rolls in the Brazen Bull, or more like carries it in, because I doubt it had wheels. At first you see a life-size bull sculpture made out of bronze. Not that impressive, you think, until someone opens the hidden door. What's this, you say, in visible confusion? That's when an ancient Greek version of a cheesy used car salesman slaps that bad boy on top twice. Bonk bonk. The hollow metallic sound puts you at ease. You're already reaching for your drachma. Now what's the point of this bull? Well, simply put a perpetrator inside, light a fire underneath, and cook him. And there's your sentence. Brand new, it's lovely, you're gonna love it, it's great, I can't speak, that's what it is. Number 3, Vlad again? What? Yes, Vlad the Impaler again, and for an equally horrific sentence. Oh boy, here we go. There's a tale of 2 religious envoys making their way to Vlad's castle, past all the people on spikes and pikes and whatnot. Ooh, gross. Which he and the castle were inspirations for Dracula, remember, which is kinda cool, makes sense. And when these Gentiles got there and met Vlad, the first thing they were asked to do was remove their hats. Now, the kind depends on what version of the story is being told, but regardless, the religious men refused to remove their hats. So Vlad had his henchmen nail the hats into their skulls so that they may never remove them ever again. Oh my god, that is horrible. That's so bad. That's so bad. Number 2, Molten Metal. This one is straight out of Mortal Kombat, a traditional sentence that comes from the Middle East, Israel, and the Ottoman Empire. Basically, you take your perp and you restrain him so he cannot move from what Jigsaw-esque trap he's about to be unleashed upon. During this, the local blacksmith has been melting down some metals until they are in liquid form. Remember, there's 3 forms of matter: liquid, gas, and solids, remember that, and sometimes plasma, depends who you ask. Then, right from the crucible, the liquid hot magma is poured in the mouth of the crook. I will let you imagine how much pain and screaming it caused. It was a lot. Number 1, flaying. Did I say the last one was from Mortal Kombat? No, now see this one is one of Scorpion's best, I promise. A perpetrator is put on a table where, alive, this is done, and it's, oh god, I get lightheaded just thinking about it. The crook is slowly and precisely skinned like a big game hunt, and then they're left like a big red meaty surprise, kind of like the Titans look like an Attack on Titan. It's awful, don't do it, and we're better than that now.
Kicking off our list at number 10, vending machine killer. Okay, right off the hop, we have to know that apparently there are a lot of vending machines in Japan. Like it's something around 1 for every 23 people, so yeah, that's a lot of snacks. So in 1985 in Hiroshima, there were 12 people who passed away and 35 people who were seriously injured from being poisoned with a chemical herbicide. Now, when the string of poisonings were investigated, authorities realized that they had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they all had the same drink shortly before falling ill. So around the time of this entire ordeal, there was a company that had launched a marketing campaign where they gave a free drink with every purchase made from, you guessed it, a vending machine. One of the many vending machines in Japan. So when people didn't want their free drink, they would just leave it on top of the vending machine for the next person who came along, which is super nice and thoughtful instead of throwing it in the garbage. But on the other hand, there's some people who are not nice or thoughtful and rather horrible. And it turns out someone was taking these drinks and lacing them with poison and then leaving them back on top of the machines for some random stranger to come around, drink it, and then be sick or pass away, like those numbers that I mentioned earlier. It's almost impossible for authorities to be able to track down whoever was doing this because, well, you have to narrow down where the person picked up the drink, and that's pretty impossible seeing as in 1985 there weren't nearly as many CCTV cameras as there are today, or vending machines apparently for that matter. So unfortunately, whoever was responsible for a mass poisoning of strangers is still out there somewhere. Number 9, Jacek Jaworek. Now, this is a man who was on the run because of horrible crimes that he committed in July of last year, so a little more recent than the 80s. He took the lives of 3 people who were a part of his own family. One of the family members was able to escape this horrific nightmare and was able to make it safely to the neighbor's house where they could call the authorities for help. But since these horrific crimes took place, he has gone missing and no one is sure of his whereabouts. Right now, it's speculated that he likely escaped from Poland where the crimes took place, but his exact whereabouts still remain quite the mystery. He could be literally anywhere, which is terrifying. Number 8, John Pyle. This human is a pile of garbage. This horrible human is not an undercover spy or an insane fraudster. He's just a monster who committed certain specific crimes that are unfortunately a little more common than any of us would like to know. Because of the nature of his crimes, I can't really talk about them here in this video because let's just say they're that brutal. But let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kind of criminals out there. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to these crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence that they found during said search, he was charged with 30 different second-degree felonies alone off just that one search, which could bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. Now, he was arrested the same day, but he posted a bail bond of $90,000 as well as surrendering his passport. Now, fast forward to 16 months, October 23rd, 2017, and of course this guy does not show up for his hearing. And thus we have a fugitive now on the run. Number 7, the Beer Man. He took the lives of at least 6 people in Mumbai, India between October 2006 and January of 2007. It's not a lot of time at all. That's a lot of people in a very short amount of time. The reason this unidentified monster is called the Beer Man, such an odd nickname, is due to one fact about each crime scene, which ended up being how they linked these crimes together in the first place. This was the presence of beer bottles that were found scattered next to each of the bodies that were found. Now, of course, it's been over a decade since the crimes were committed, so it's definitely upsetting that this person has yet to have been caught, obviously. But it's been a while, so maybe they're naturally gone. You know what I'm saying? Number 6, the Honolulu Killer. This is another one of those horrible, horrifying, unidentified serial killers who was active in and around Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, these crimes took place in 1985 and 1986, and throughout those years, it's said that whoever is responsible for these crimes took the lives of at least 5 women. These women seemingly didn't have any connection to each other as they were all from different walks of life, but because of the gruesome similarities between each of them, authorities were able to determine that they were likely committed by the same horrible person. Despite the years that it's been, the perpetrator has never been identified and could still be out there somewhere hiding from taking responsibility for their actions. Number 5, the Doodler, another stupid nickname for another horrible unidentified killer. He received his nickname due to the fact that he would sketch his victims before taking their lives. Yeah, how sinister is that? You see that on TikTok, but this is like the evil, horrible version of that. This unidentified killer committed their crimes in the San Francisco area from January 1974 to September 1975, and they specifically targeted the gay community. It's believed that 14 deaths can be attributed to this killer, while 3 others were injured in the process. Unfortunately, because of the stigma and the sensitivity surrounding gay men at the time, the 3 who survived this monster's attacks were very reluctant when speaking to authorities for fear of being outed as a result of it. This, of course, has led to there being very little information for them to work with in terms of, actually identifying the person responsible. But for a while, there was a primary suspect, but that person has never been officially charged because sadly, none of the survivors felt comfortable enough to testify in court. There's also a very real chance that authorities know who the killer is, but just don't have the evidence to prove it in the court of law, which is also a terrifying thought. Number 4, the I-70. This unidentified killer is known to have taken the lives of 6 store clerks in the Midwest back in the spring of 1992. The reason he is referred to as the I-70 killer is because most of the stores were just a few miles off Interstate 70, I-70. While most of his victims were women, there was one man, but it's believed that he may have been expecting a female employee at the time, and that's the only difference there. The killings were clearly the main objective of his crimes as well, considering the fact that each scene there was only a small amount of cash that was actually taken. Aside from these initial 6 crimes, it's thought that he also might be responsible for the deaths of 3 more store clerks in Texas back in 1993 and 1994, as well as 1 more in Indiana in 2001. Number 3. Jason Derek Brown. This piece of work has been missing ever since November 2004. That's quite a long time, but that doesn't mean authorities have given up just yet. Jason fled from Phoenix, Arizona in the year after he allegedly took the life of an armored car guard who was just outside of a movie theater. Now, after committing this already horrific crime, he then took the money and then ran, just to make things even worse. On the FBI website, where it details his crimes as well as other details about him and who to contact with any information, all that good stuff, it gives a little bio on Jason, and it says that he enjoys being the center of attention and that he clearly likes showing off his luxurious lifestyle. Yeah, it's crazy how many of these people are known for trying to flaunt their stolen lifestyle. Another thing the website reminds us is that he should be considered armed and dangerous at all times. Number 2, the River City Ripper. One of the most terrifying things that exists are, of course, serial killers who are still on the loose, especially when you find out that they've been recently active, right? That's the horrible new news that we don't want to hear. Now, this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, and 3 of which were fatal. These horrific crimes took place between August of 2020 and April of 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still, of course, very little to go on in terms of actually being able to identify this horrible human being. The FBI was contacted shortly after the survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created a profile of this unidentified killer. So there's work being done, although there's little evidence, there's still some momentum. And finally, number 1, Pedro Lopez. Pedro Lopez had a very difficult life growing up, and unfortunately this led to him living a life committing a plethora of horrible crimes throughout South America during the 1970s. Now, by the time the 80s had rolled around, he had made a mistake during one of these awful crimes, and this led to his arrest. Now, once in police custody, he spilled everything on basically his entire life and confessed at that point to an insane amount of crimes. Just confessed to everything and just unloaded. Like, we're talking confessing to 240 killings on top of the 110 that they already suspected him of doing. Police were a little skeptical of just how many crimes he said he committed, but Pedro was able to lead them to a mass grave where they recovered a total of 53 people's remains. So at that point they're like, yeah, we believe you, this is horrible. Pedro, of course, went to jail, but get this, he was somehow released in 1994, which is absolutely insane. That's why I had to put him on number 1 here. He was sent to some sort of mental institution for 3 years, but he was also released from there for good behavior. That's horrible.
Number 10. See you later, alligator. A Florida man was arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon after allegedly throwing a 4-foot alligator through a fast food chain's drive-through window. Joshua James threw a live alligator that he had stolen through a Palm Beach Wendy's. Let me guess, Josh, the froster machine was down, huh? Yeah, I've heard it too. He was also charged with illegally possessing an alligator. Do you have a license for this thing? Yeah? Do you mind if I... Jesus! Okay. James then drove his pickup truck to the window at about 1:20 a.m. and after being handed his drink, he tossed the alligator inside and sped off. In James's court appearance, he was banned from all Wendy's restaurants and to avoid possessing animals aside from his own dog and to undergo a mental health test. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty healthy punishment. You know how many Wendy's this guy's gotta drive past every day? Just the smell of the fries alone? That's a life sentence right there.
Number 9. Penguin heist. Okay, back in 2012, the world did not end, thankfully. Kyle covered that in our last video. If you missed it, go check it out. But in 2012, 2 Welsh tourists got themselves a court date. Yeah, they had this bright idea. Here we go. They had a few cold ones and thought it was a bright idea to steal a penguin from SeaWorld, Australia. Look, I'm not a fan of SeaWorld as well. They suck, but don't steal a penguin. Just watch Happy Feet 1 or 2 and call it a day. That's it. Just look, but don't touch. Penguin that almost got stolen, his name was Dirk. Yeah, you never guessed that one, did you? The guilty are Reese Owen Jones, 21, and Carrie Mules, 20. They were both fined $1,000 and Dirk was safely returned with no harm being done. No harm, no Dirk done foul. Here we go. We grew up watching Free Willy, but Free Dirk? That sounds like a movement. That's wild. I'm on board. Let's do it.
Number 8. Tie the knot. A woman and 3 men have been arrested after a huge fight broke out in a pizza shop, apparently over a wrong order of cheesy garlic knots. Hey, that'll do it. If you haven't been in a physical altercation over garlic knots, you're not eating garlic knots right. A woman apparently went crazy in a rage when a Palm Coast pizzeria put cheese on her garlic knots. Hey look, I ate cheese too, I get it. I'll say it. Her friends then joined in on the mayhem, destroying the pizzeria. Flying tubs of Parmesan cheese, fax machines thrown, cash registers ripped out of the wall. These people were pissed. Witnesses who had their dinners spoiled by the fight saw this and knew the people apparently, and were all charged with burglary and criminal mischief. I mean, I understand. That's all I'm saying. I understand. I get hangry. There's been some chairs thrown. Taylor knows.
Oh yeah, cereal buddy, Fruit Loops? All I'm saying is I'm the Cinnamon Toast Kid, Kyle's the Fruit Loops. That's it. You go on this side of the table, I go on that. Also Red Milk. Number 7, Donald Pugh. Where to start here? Okay, I included a random assortment of awful people on this list. This story I had to share. Donald Pugh, here we go. He was suspected of arson and vandalism. So police in Ohio put out a photo of his face. They asked locals to step in and get this man caught. Get this criminal off the streets. This was back in 2016. The photo that was issued to the public was this one here. But Donald wasn't a fan, right? So he sent the police a better photo of himself for them to use. Yeah, he sent them this one. Look, Donald, the photo admittedly is much better. Okay, facial hair, you're all cleaned up, the shades are solid. That's a great addition. Really adds the criminal to your eyes. Plus, you know, gotta protect your eyesight whilst you commit arson. Gotta watch for those flames. Smart moves. Awesome. The police department got the pic, just a selfie, along with one message. The message said, "Here's a better photo. That one is terrible." Nice. Keeping it nice and short so we don't have to open the message. I like that. Surprisingly, Donald was immediately caught, and Ohio police even reached out and said, "Thanks to the power of social media and tips called into authorities, we have learned that Donald Chip Pugh has been arrested in Florida." Of course it's Florida. It's always Florida. What's up with that?
Number 6. Candyman. 2 Brooklyn men were awarded $33,000 in court over a humiliating arrest made by police officers in Coney Island in 2014. The men were arrested due to the illegal possession and distribution of although it was nothing more than a bag of hard candy Jolly Ranchers. The officers arrested the men outside of the candy store, strip searched them, and the candy was taken in as evidence. Ha! Could have fooled me with the candy store right there. The undercover cop said, I quote, "He thought it was the stuff from Breaking Bad." Like, how is this dude a cop? Yeah, you seen Breaking Bad? Yeah, just go do that. Okay, cool. Like, who hired this man? The men then sued the police department. Yeah, no sh**. It's candy. I'm in a candy store. The men were held then for 3 days. Imagine, 3 days being locked up with murderers and you're in on tooth decay. Also, how long does it take to see if it's candy or not? Just pop it in your mouth in the cruiser. Ah, it's raspberry. They're good. Let them off.
Number 5, Mr. Smith. Back in 2014, this criminal was caught rather quickly, as most of these are. A bank robber, for one, arrived with a terrible disguise. The guy had sunglasses and socks over his shoes. Yeah, he looked like a stupid mascot with those big sock shoes, you know what I mean? He looked like the M&M. The big, you got it. The cashier didn't give him any money, so the failed robber left empty-handed, thankfully. Thing is, the robber had been to the bank 30 minutes earlier, and he gave the teller his full name and address. Yeah, Dean Smith. He was 27 at the time he got busted in a Welsh village, and he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars.
Number 4. Smells good. A 91-year-old was charged with smuggling illegal substances into Australia in 2015. Victor Twartz of Sydney could face a life in prison if he's convicted of importing 10 pounds of said stuff into the country on a flight from India. Inside soap. Soap? Soap. Like bars of soap. He told the authorities that when he was about to board his plane to return to Sydney, he was handed a bag that he was told contained gifts for someone in Australia. After he landed at Sydney, of course, a quick search of Twartz's luggage found 27 packages of soap. How smelly is this guy? Which tested positive for not soap. Apparently he didn't know he was a mule, or even know what a mule was. Come on, he's 91. Yeah, when you get to the airport, take this, give it to the boss. Oh, okay. Do you know that I invented chewing gum?
Number 3, the other pocket. Coming from Pontiac, Michigan, Christopher Jansen thought that he had the the right of way. He claimed to have been searched unfairly without a warrant. Now, the prosecutor explained, however, that given the fact there was a weapon-sized bulge in Christopher's jacket at the time, it looked like something suspicious, and it turned out it was said thing that was suspicious. Get what I'm saying? In order to prove that this was not the case and that there's no way authorities could have ever known that there was a weapon on him, Christopher handed over the jacket to the judge to see for themselves. Not a bad play. Thing is, if you're gonna do that, make sure there aren't any other illegal substances in the other pocket. Gotta check the front, back, side, and side, my friend, that's it. The judge found it, and the rest is history, obviously. Yeah, I wanted to throw in a more lighter one before we get to our last two, because now it gets a little crazy.
Number 2, Grannied. An 11-year-old boy from Ohio was taken into police custody after allegedly punching his grandmother twice in the face at a Dayton toy store when she refused to buy him the toy that he wanted. 60-year-old Barbara Weeks told police that her grandson had punched her in the nose and tried to again before she ran out of the store and away from the boy in fear. Weeks then admitted to police that she was terrified of her own grandson, who was taken to the Montgomery County Juvenile Justice Center and charged with domestic violence. Can you imagine if we tried that with grandma? Oh. First off, that's your grandmother. You're supposed to love her and eat cookies that she makes for you. Our grandmother would have just RKO'd that kid. You know what I mean? She had picked his head up and walked out of the store nicely with it too.
And number 1, Unlucky Logan. Okay, if you haven't seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, spoiler alert, it's a great time. Gotcha, I'm not gonna spoil this. DiCaprio and Hanks at the top of their game. Young Leo stars as conman Frank Abagnale Jr., who posed as a doctor and a lawyer and a pilot and successfully evaded the FBI. For a bit. Maybe he gets caught, maybe he doesn't, I don't know, I've never seen it. Now in real life, back in 2015, Logan James, who was just 19 years old at the time, tried pulling a young Leo. Except he doesn't have the same look, so it obviously didn't work. James had breached his license conditions after being released from prison on February 6, 2015, so now he was of course getting called back to prison. Can't be doing that. Gwent police took to Facebook to ask locals to help out, but one user in the comments section started getting a lot of upvotes. Why, it was Logan James himself, on his own Facebook, commenting on the Gwent police status. Haha, catch me if you can, won't see me slippin'. Over 40 likes on the comment, of course. He then added as well, I've been walking around near home so they're not trying too hard to catch me. James was then caught hours later, and the police thanked the public for doing their part. Yeah, thanks Logan, couldn't have done it without you. Literally. Number 10, Cassie Chadwick. Also a Canadian, how could she? I'm upset right off the bat. Cassie went to the United States to pull this one off. If Canadians want any fame, they always go to the States. Even if it's fame for being a con artist. They're like, yeah, you gotta go south, bro. Gotta go to Hollywood, man. Just get out of here. I'm like, no, that's so stupid. She went to the States to convince everybody that she was the daughter of Andrew Carnegie. This was back in the early 1900s, so yeah, it worked. She convinced Cleveland banks to hand out $5 million in securities. Now keep in mind, that's a lot more than $5 million now, so sweet. Also, this was a time where women could not get bank loans in general, ever, so this was an impossible task times 2. Is it wrong of me to say I'm kind of impressed? Cassie passed away at age 50 in 1907 in the Columbus Penitentiary. Yeah, she got caught, but she got away with it for a bit, so, you know. Number 9, Donald Pugh. Okay, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Donald Pugh was suspected of arson and vandalism. So police in Ohio put a photo out of his face, of course, and they asked locals to step in and help get this man off the streets. Now this was back in 2016. Now the photo that was issued to the public was this one. But Donald wasn't a fan, right? So he sent the police a better photo of himself to use. Look Donald, the shot, yeah, I admit it's much better. Facial hair is cleaned up a bit, the shades are pretty sick, that's a great addition. Gotta protect your eyesight as you commit arson, I guess. The police department got this pic, it's just, you know, a selfie, with the message, here is a better photo. That one is terrible. So they're like, okay, thank you. Shocker, he was caught immediately. Number 8, Logan James. Not to be confused with James Logan, that's Wolverine. No, Logan James over here had actually just breached his license conditions after being released from prison on February 6, 2015. Gwent police took to Facebook to ask locals to help out, but one user in the comments section started getting a lot of upvotes, a lot of likes. It's Logan James himself commenting on the Gwent police status. What does he have to say? Let's tune in. Haha, catch me if you can, won't see me slippin'. Over 40 likes, obviously, is a pretty hot comment, right? He then added, I've been walking around near home, so they're not trying too hard to catch me, lol. Yeah, James was then caught hours later near said home, and the police thanked the public again for doing their part. Thanks Logan again, we couldn't have done it without you. Number 7, Adrian Klein. Apparently we can't trust funeral directors now. That's fun. I guess sleep in fear. This was recent as well. This was back in 2011 when Aspen Mortuaries had a contract embalmer. First of all, that's a pretty wild job just to pick up and go around and do. Kudos if you do that. Just a contract embalmer out there. Hit that thumbs up. Nice. His name was Adrian Klein and the job was going well. I guess as well as it could be going in that specific job. Until a local pawn shop delivered a tip to police saying that Klein was selling a lot of gold. A suspicious amount of gold. And considering his job, now we gotta ask a few questions, right? Was Adrian selling watches, rings, necklaces, anything like that? No, Adrian was actually selling gold teeth that he, himself. Between May and November of 2011, Klein had been selling dental gold to over 17 different pawn shops and making a pretty penny because of it. That's disgusting. Imagine the smell. Like, how do you even take that to the shop without them? Let's move on. I'm gonna throw up. Number 6, Charles Ponzi. Yeah, we've all heard the term Ponzi scheme at one point or another, but what does that even mean? Who is this man? What has he done? What has he done in history? I always get him confused with the Fonz. So growing up, I was like, this Fonz character is a little sketchy. I think. I don't know. I don't watch this show. I'm far too young. A Ponzi scheme. It's a sham of an operation. Back in 1903, Charles first moved to the United States. He was an Italian immigrant who was just looking for work. Simple as that. Now, after working job after job after job, he eventually got hired at Bank Zerosi in Montreal, Canada. When the bank went bankrupt, Ponzi was screwed. He needed to do something fast. So he dabbled into smuggling and then promptly was caught. Now, after he was released, he went into the postal system, right? This is his last hurrah. He started to buy large quantities of postal coupons from countries that already had a weak economy. He then hired a bunch of agents and trained them up good, like Wolf of Wall Street style, and the whole idea was that you would promise investors that they would receive double their investment in return within 45 days. Yeah, how lovely does that sound? Agents got 10% commission during this whole thing, so as far as the scheme, it's actually not bad. Number 5. Simon Leviev. Number 5 for Mr. Leviev. This is the funniest, it's not funny, but this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. I have to mention this guy. It's quite recent and there's a documentary about him on Netflix. It's called The Tinder Swindler. Perhaps you've seen this. I threw this on, not really sure what to expect. I was doing some laundry. I was hooked. I had to watch this entire thing. This guy, he's wild. He would go on the dating app, he would go on Tinder, and he would talk to women. He would get to know them a bit, favorite color, favorite album, all that stupid stuff. But then he would convince them that he was the owner of an Israeli diamond company. He would have private jets, bottles, security, you named it. He even had a big jack dude named Peter. He had a big, strong man that would just follow him around. That's how you know it's the real deal. And then he would text them out of nowhere in peril. He would say his enemies are after him, like, diamond business enemies, whatever, deep stuff like that. And he sent these women pictures. He would send them photos of Peter, like big, strong Peter, the security guard, injured, right? It didn't look great at all. Simon would also send voice notes saying that he was being attacked and how his enemies are after him. And then he would ask for like $20,000. And it worked. He did this with multiple women and it worked. It was horrible. It's the worst situation you can get yourself into. At the end of the day, he only got a 15-month sentence back in 2019. Number 4, Ivina Fisher. Any fans of Breaking Bad here? I slept on it for far too long. It's a good time. This next one might ring a bell or two. I don't know. Ivina Fisher, she was a 74-year-old calculus professor from Boston, and back in 2012, she was accused of running the same type of lab that Walter White was running. She didn't do it alone either. She had her own little Jesse Pinkman to go alongside, Her sidekick was her 29-year-old son, Grigory. Gotta keep it in the family, I guess. Reports from the Boston Globe detailed that a bomb squad had to go in their Somerville home and they removed multiple hazardous material boxes, so they were just up to the worst in their own home. They were officially charged with the distribution of conspiracy to violate law and a violation in a school zone. Yeah, that's just, you can't do anything in a school zone. Especially something like this. This was all done by a 74-year-old calculus professor. Number 3, John Pyle. John Pyle is just a pile of garbage, absolutely. Now, because of the nature of his crimes, I can't get into them too, deeply on YouTube here, but let's just say that he's definitely one of the worst kinds of criminals that ever existed. On June 24th, 2016, authorities searched his home after receiving 3 tips relating to his crimes. Now, the amount of and the severity of the incriminating evidence they found during said search, it was unspeakable. He was charged then with 30 different second-degree felonies, which could ultimately bring a sentence of 450 years in prison. He was arrested the same day and posted a bail bond of $90,000, as well as surrendering his passport. Now fast forward 16 months to October 23rd, 2017. John doesn't show up for his hearing. So now we have a fugitive on the run. Now, even though he gave up his passport, it is said that he was still somehow able to board a Carnival cruise ship. A Carnival cruise ship that was bound for Mexico. So he got off the ship when it arrived and he never reboarded, and he's now yet to be located. Number 2. The River City Ripper. We talked about Jack the Ripper numerous times on this channel. Well, there's another one. Everyone's got to have cool nicknames like they're wrestlers or DC villains. This is so cringe. Well, this serial killer is wanted in connection to 4 different incidents that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, 3 of which were fatal. These crimes took place between August 2020 and April 2021, and despite one of the victims thankfully surviving the attack and then being able to provide a description of the assailant, there's still little to go on in terms of being able to actually identify this horrible human being. That's why I wanted to include it, because I'm like, hey, hopefully, never know. Least I can do. The FBI was contacted shortly after said survivor was able to give a testimony to authorities, and their behavioral analysis team created this profile of this unidentified killer. Now, these crimes were all just random acts of violence as well that all completely occurred unprovoked. The case has gained a lot of attention, but still the monster remains at large. So look into it. I implore you to take a glance, especially if you live in the area. And finally, number 1, Belle Gunnis. We'll end on a dark one. A real dark one, of course. Originally born in Norway, Belle Gunnis moved to the United States at age 22. Gunnis then married her first husband in 1884. They owned a candy store and all was going well until a fire out of nowhere just destroyed their entire business. It even took out 2 family members. It forced them to collect life insurance, but then in 1890, Gunnis put out a life insurance policy on her husband and he ended up dying that same day. Ha! What are the odds? That's crazy. That's bizarre timing. Good thing she did that, huh? In 1892, Gunnis married her second husband, and 8 months after their wedding, he died from a skull injury and she collected his life insurance. What? That's 2 now. What's going on? I don't know. What a coincidence. Finally, in 1908, Gunnis's farm burned down, and upon investigation, 11 bodies were all found. Now, it was never officially determined whether or not Gunnis was one of those souls. She may have escaped, who knows, but that still leaves around 14 victims that she still has to answer for.
Number 10. Man needs underwear to avoid breathalyzer. In Alberta, Canada, there was a man in 1985 by the name of David Zerfleur. He was pulled over by an RCMP officer for weaving on a snowy road after apparently drinking one night. He then decided to run from police after being pulled over on foot. It's literally every cop's dream. They're just sitting there, please run. Please run. Yes! Of course they caught him and booked him for what intended on being an impaired driving charge. Whilst in the back of the cruiser, of course, David ripped the crotch out of his underwear to eat it. Couple things here. How do you even get that down? I can't swallow a Tylenol without choking. Apparently he didn't eat it. He spat it out after a while and was just kind of chewing on it. His theory was that the cotton might absorb the alcohol content before he got to the station to do a proper test. Which, when he got there, he was acquitted of all charges and blew a legal, respectful .8. He did it. I mean, first off, dick move for driving though, that's not cool. Very dangerous and very selfish. Best part comes weeks later at his hearing. Just so happened a group of grade 11 and 12 law students watching the hearing as a class, just, teenagers giggling the entire time. Of course they were teenagers. Order, order! Did you stuff your own tidy whities into your mouth? Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness.
Number 9. Spider hostage. Look, I don't like spiders. This next guy on our list doesn't even respect spiders, okay? Paul Brian Smith, the man who has 3 first names. Back in 2012, Paul agreed to watch a friend's pet spider, which on paper at first I'm like, hey, gross, but I get it, that's awesome. A little bit of Home Alone vibes going on there. When the friend came to collect said furry friend, Paul held the spider ransom. Said if he didn't get $100, he'd swat the spider. He'd swat the spider. Sound like a Spider-Man villain there. Like J. Jonah Jameson. We're gonna swat the spider. In turn, Paul received 40 months in prison for burglary, theft, possession of drug paraphernalia, and more. Yeah, there may or may not have also been a person hiding in the closet when cops came around. This one's really bizarre. Can't really talk about the weird, awful extra details on this case. Paul Brian Smith, give it a lookie once you're done here. Also, save the spiders, they're good.
Number 8. A bath salts Christmas. An Ohio Christmas miracle. Sounds like a Christian rock group. A man by the name of Terry Trent was charged with breaking and entering a home at Christmas when he was arrested very high on little more than just Christmas spirit. The family arrived home and saw the man sitting on their couch watching some Christmas shows. While Dad's on the phone with police, the man apologized, thanked them for his stay, and calmly left. Family said that the man apologized after lighting a candle, fixing up their wreath, relaxing on the couch, and finishing up the last Christmas tree decorations. Ah, the spirit of Christmas. Guy's the opposite to the Grinch. Dude, this guy's the real Santa Claus. I hope you were all good. He's coming in to do his check-ins. Police arrived and said Terry didn't cause any problems, went in with them calmly and quietly. See, guy just needed some Christmas company. Wanted to catch Mr. Bean's Christmas special. Who wouldn't? That could have been really, really bad and turned out to be a zombie apocalypse Christmas dinner, but thankfully it did not. Also, it's Christmas. I've seen my aunts after some wine. It's pretty well the same thing, isn't it?
Number 7. Photobomb. I love a good photobomb. I dug this one out of the archives. This is from 6 years ago at a bar. I'm a big fan of ruining a beautiful moment between two other friends. Friends? These are my friends. Sometimes photos catch great moments. Sometimes they catch not so smooth criminals as well. Back in October 2010, a Wisconsin man got caught trying to steal a tourist bag. This guy was caught in 4K. While he was stealing the bag, the owners of said bag were taking a selfie a few meters away. He's in the background taking the bag, just clear as day. It's so funny. He immediately was sentenced to 5 days in jail, obviously. The 69-year-old man's name is Glenn Lambright. Pretty ironic last name, seeing how easily he was caught. Mr. Lambright was also fined $500. Guy just gets caught in a boomerang.
Number 6. Dances with lions. 32-year-old Maya Autry of Bronx, New York was caught on camera at the Bronx Zoo apparently taunting and dancing in a lions exhibit with a lion. She apparently calls herself the Lion Queen, and she has been seen on camera not once, but twice, dangerously close to these cats inside the lions exhibit. She's lucky that this thing is tranked out of its mind, just chillin', bored. People will do anything nowadays for the gram. She's throws some cash, threw a dozen red roses, and danced for the lion. You know, dinner and a show. The lion has been praying for a day where someone gets this bold. Apparently she gotten herself into the exhibit before and was handed a citation prior and a year ban before returning again. 2 counts of criminal trespassing. The video is great too. The lion's just sitting there. He's like, so you coming in or not? You just gonna stand there? Hey, you know the score of the Knicks game? No? Alright.
Number 5. Banana theft. Thief. Banana thief. Theft? I don't know. Turns out bananas curse people, makes them do crazy things. This next couple is pretty odd. Here we go. Back in 2014, a Connecticut burglar drove his station wagon through the doors of a closed convenience store. He drove literally into a gas station, got out, stole a single banana, they peeled and then ate the fruit, and then fled the scene. That's right, nothing else was taken, no cash. I mean, there's obviously significant damage that has to be taken care of now, but the banana, the lone single banana, why? This isn't Mario Kart. You can't just throw a peel down and then make a getaway. You're gonna get caught. It's 2022, my guy. Keep your bananas safe, folks. These people are sick. For example,
Number 4. Fruit fight. Florida resident Philip Joseph Smolsky was charged with assault and battery on his girlfriend for apparently using a banana to throw at her. Police were called on the morning of January 3rd, 2014, and Pasco County deputy noticed a red mark on the victim's head where she said she had been hit by a flying fruit. That's like the start of a Cops episode, you know? Just driving.
42, David, we're actually responding now to a banana in pajamas over on Affidavit Avenue.
The arrest affidavit shows that the same deputy also found a banana in a nearby garbage can, and that parts of the peel were found on the ground near where the girlfriend was sitting. A clue. In addition to the domestic battery charges, he was also charged with attempting to resist arrest without violence. How do you resist arrest without violence? Just say no, like no thank you, politely a couple times? No, I'm okay, thank you. Police say that pepper spray then was used to apprehend Smolsky. Ouch. This is just like the origins of a villain story. Oh no, it's Mr. Potassium Man. He's like throwing banana peels.
Don't slip. Whip!
Number 3. Tattoos tell all. Sometimes you get a tattoo to remember a person, or a place, or a time. Sometimes you get a tattoo of a mountain on your forearm because you like nature and being outside and that one trip that one time. Great, we get it, we love it. Every tattoo is meaningful in some way, sure. Well, thanks to those fond memories being drawn in ink, it was quite easy for California police to find the killer of a victim who had died 4 years prior. This killer, Anthony Garcia, decided to remember this horrible act after doing it by getting a tattoo of all the grim details right there on his chest. Yeah, police noticed the chest tats when taking Garcia's mugshot for another crime, much smaller than, murder, and that's where the tattoo stuck out to the police. They're like, wait a minute, we've been here before. The Christmas lights, the bent street lamp near the liquor store, this was the exact scene where the body was found 4 years prior. There was even a helicopter that looked angry depicting Garcia's nickname, Chopper. Yeah, I have a dragonfly for my mom. Yeah, I don't like needles, it's probably the only one.
Number 2. Reverse Santa. Ah, the old reverse Santa, huh? The old chimney sweep. Apparently this is way more common than I thought. A Maryland man who was asked to remain anonymous, due to the ongoing case of course, is facing charges in court recently as the police had to respond to 2 calls from the same house. The family apparently heard scuffling and coughing in the middle of the night from behind their fireplace wall, and decided to reach out to authorities. But they were already beat to the chase by the man stuck in their wall. Yeah, I'd stay anonymous too. That's embarrassing. Guys just whispering directions to your house. Yeah, it's Bradshaw? Brad Bradshaw? Bravo? Romeo? Guy had to rat on himself. The fire department showed up, had to rip the wall down brick by brick to get Buddy out. Like, you wasted everyone's time, man. The family's time, the first responders' time, your getaway driver's time. And these guys' mugshots, they're the best. They're always just covered in soot, like a bad Oliver production. I'd do anything!
And finally, number 1. Use current location. Gotta save the most bizarre for last, I guess. Kristen DaCosta from Massachusetts. She's clearly never seen the movie Disturbia. She's sleeping on it. She's sleeping on Shia LaBeouf. Kristen was court-ordered to wear an ankle bracelet as part of her probation, but she luckily didn't know that the bracelet could track your whereabouts. Yeah, what did she think it was doing this whole time? She's like, okay, thanks. That's random. And then just committed crimes? This is why you have to watch Disturbia. Stop sleeping on Shia. Kristen had no clue that it was tracking her while she committed 17 break-ins. Yeah, homes all over southern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Bedford, Fairhaven. I mean, where does she get the energy, you know? Where does she find all that energy? So random. She didn't destroy anything at all. She just stole jewelry and then left. The police just watched her go spot to spot, tracking her down, just ping, 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 awesome, there she is now, great. One owner didn't even realize they'd been robbed. That's how fast Kristen was, so, you know, if only she didn't have that ankle monitor on the entire time, she would have maybe got away with one of the 17 that she tried. I can't hop one fence, let alone 17, that's insane. I'm kind of impressed. Don't do crimes, but that's a little impressive. Number 10, George Chapman. Starting off with George Chapman, we're going back to the late 1800s for this piece of work right here. He began his career at first as a Polish doctor, but in 1888 he moved to London, and that's when things got a little more dicey. Once in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, not a side thing, not 4. Let's do 4 at the same time. George Chapman was a doctor, a cheater, and a killer. He poisoned all 4 of these women with arsenic. It was terrible. Chapman himself was executed for these crimes in 1903, but we're still talking about them because this guy was so bad they thought perhaps he might have been Jack the Ripper, but that's since been proven otherwise, so yeah. Imagine someone being so bad, they're like, maybe he was Jack the Ripper, maybe he was just another horrible individual, who knows. Number 9, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston. Okay, this was the famous Devil Made Me Do It case. If you've watched the new Conjuring sequel with the same title, this should all ring a familiar bell. Well, it's based of course on a true story, all that's real. Back in 1981 in Brookfield, Connecticut, Arnie was convicted of first-degree manslaughter and the victim was his landlord, Alan Bono. Now, prior to this, about 2 months prior, the Glatzel family witnessed their son David host a demon. Right? David was behaving strangely, the family was confident this was the work from the devil, so they called in the pros. They called in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now this was a process that lasted days, and witnesses say that the demon that fled out of the body of David was the same that took over Arnie a few months later. The same demon that made him attack his landlord. Yeah, Arnie was convicted and he served 5 years out of a 10 to 20 year sentence. Yeah, he was released on good behavior. Number 8, Albert Fish. Albert is one of the oldest people on this list. He was dubbed the Brooklyn Vampire, or the Moon Maniac, or even the Boogeyman himself. It's clear that Albert was a terrible human who did terrible things. I can't really talk about some of the stuff, but yeah, given those nicknames, you can piece it together. In the early 1900s, Albert was arrested, tried, and convicted for killing, and then doing other things with these people. Horrible. But the horror was not over at that point. No, Albert began to claim that although people knew about 3, the actual number of casualties was closer to 100. And he even claimed that he had some in every state. So that's disgusting. And to make matters even worse, as if it wasn't already terrible enough, this deranged lunatic also sent a letter to the mother of one of his victims. He sent a letter detailing everything about how he lured the victim and the rest of the horrific details that occurred afterwards. Number 7, Jeffrey Dahmer. Okay, Jeffrey's one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place, of course, from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal for this channel, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. At his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court, some interesting things to say. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to bolster his insanity plea. Odd take, but sure. Again, the devil made me do it type of bullshit. Now, his attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, dare I say caught up in the character from the movie Exorcist 3. Said character being Satan because he was the personification of evil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. I wonder if the devil made him do it. Number 6. Richard Iceman Kuklinski. He became one of America's most prolific killers after being hired by the famous 5 families in New York City, okay? He had around a 30-year career as a contract killer, and while he only ended up being charged and convicted for 4 killings, that's still a lot, but he had claimed that the actual number was close to 250, so yeah. When we think of what an assassin would look like, he may not be at the top of this list, which may partially be what helped him be so successful in the first place. While he killed his victims in a multitude of horrible ways, he was dubbed the Iceman due to the fact that he froze all of the bodies. This was to ensure that the coroners would be unable to determine their true time of death, right, and really figure out who was doing it. Richard ended up passing away in jail in 2006. Yeah, we know the time of death for that one. We know that one very well. The Iceman, check it out, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary. Number 5, Ted Bundy. One of the most famous killers of all time. Ted Bundy killed upwards of 30 people during his crime spree back in the 1970s. Now, most interviews with Ted are extremely well known and they're horrible, but there's one interview that's very disturbing that's not as popular as the others. In this interview, he's talking about taking the life of a student, Georgianne Hawkins. The chilling part of it is how he talks about these dark matters just so matter-of-factly, like it's a casual conversation between work friends, like it's not him describing the most horrible acts ever committed.
She had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor me for a Spanish test. It's kind of odd.
Now, of course, over on Netflix, you can pick a number of installments involving Ted Bundy. There's Conversations with a Killer, there's a movie with Zac Efron. Choose your fate. Either way, the story that you're going to hear is chilling, so you've been warned. Number 4, The Staircase. The Staircase is a classic true crime staple, one of the most widely debated cases ever, as a matter of fact. Back in 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead in her home. Now, this docuseries follows the investigation, a few theories surrounding the case and the trial, but Kathleen was found at the bottom of the stairs of her home, and it's horrible, it's sad, it's tragic. And while it was originally regarded as fatal, but an accidental fall that caused her passing, as the investigation unfolds, the truth gets a little more murky. Kathleen's husband, Michael, had always been somewhere near the top of the suspect list onto what happened here, considering that 1, he was the last one to see her alive, and 2, was actually home and supposedly in the backyard when this fall occurred. So yeah, definitely a suspect, for sure. We're gonna ask some questions. There's crazy theories surrounding this death. There's theories of Michael's infidelities all the way to a barn owl. There's a lot of speculation about this case, and this documentary is one you want to watch if you're a true crime lover. You're not really sure what to think afterwards, so comment down below. It's like this is chilling. This is a really chilling case. Number 3, Richard Ramirez. Richard, who is known as the Night Stalker, with of course a documentary under the same name. All these horrible people have documentaries. Richard Ramirez was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of Los Angeles back in the 1980s. He was known for invading homes, which actually initially made him dubbed as the Walk-In Killer. But he had another signature that was concerning to many people, especially during the height of the Satanic Panic. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Imagine walking in on that, that's terrifying. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of the crime, authorities became worried that he was a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was just his own kind of monster. It said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. And during his court appearances, he would also hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." So yeah, quite horrible, I'd say. Number 2, Charlene Gallego. A match made in hell, it seems. Okay, this is a 2-for-1, so buckle up. Back in the late 70s, Charlene Gallego, alongside her twisted husband, Gerald, were the worst in Sacramento, California. They kidnapped, then they later killed 10 victims. It really was the most twisted situation. Disgusting, awful people. Cut to 1984, Charlene pleads guilty to and receives 16 years. Gerald was waiting for execution, but he actually died of cancer before meeting that demise. So, yeah, I guess nature helped out with that one. Charlene, on the other hand, she got out. She actually moved to Fair Oaks, California, and has since changed her name. You can sleep on that. Could be living on your street, who knows. And finally, number 1, don't f with cats. Okay, when I say this is one of the most captivating documentaries I've ever seen, I mean it, okay? I was late to the party for this one. I watched it way long after it was released, but from the moment I started it, I could not stop. This documentary follows the story of the killing of Lynn Junn, which is one of Canada's most infamous crimes ever. I wanted to end on it because, of course, I'm a Canadian. I saw this on the news when I was in school. Lynn was killed by a man named Luca Magnotta, who was already stirring up some internet buzz because he was posting some pretty horrific videos before this crime even happened. As the name hinted towards, he was with cats. That's all I can say. It's horrible. The documentary follows a couple of unbelievable cyber sleuths who saw Luca's messed up videos with the cats and who were intent on finding out who he was and where he was before this killing happened. They knew it was going to get worse, so they tried to track him down and, I'm not gonna spoil the rest, but yeah, it's unbelievable. The crimes themselves are absolutely horrible. The story is almost unbelievable also, but the work that these cyber I already said that, whatever. The documentary really has it all if you're a true crime person. It really is hard to watch because of how tragic it is and the situations are dark, but again, the ending is worth it. It's definitely worth the watch, especially if you don't know the full story. They get them. Spoilers, they get them.
Number 10, Canada. What? When you clicked on this video, I bet you weren't expecting the Great White North to be expert smugglers, did you? Well, truth be told, even as a Canadian, neither did I. But the history here is kind of interesting, so strap in, folks. Okay, so Prohibition. No more production and sale of alcohol in America. Canada, as America's little brother, followed suit. However, Canada's laws were not as strict. While consuming and production of alcohol was banned from bars, it was still legal for medicinal, religious, and really every other reason you need a bottle of whiskey for. However, the most important point was that in Canada, the export of alcohol was still allowed. So literally, bootleggers, outlaws, crooks, and a lot of thirsty folks flocked to places like Montreal where a lot of the stricter laws were just repealed. This also meant that the flock of unsavory characters could just load up a boat full of liquid courage, and there wasn't really anything the law could do to stop them, even though they knew what and where it was going to. American speakeasies and dry places on the American side. Kinda interesting. Good old Canada. Look at that. Canada supplying your booze. Love that. Love that for you. Number 9, Dutch Schultz. Oh, come on, Dutch. I know you need your money to get to Tahiti, but you're bootlegging Dutch. And by the way, Mike is a rat, Dutch. Anyway, haven't busted out the Arthur Morgan impression in a while, but here we are. Originally named Arthur Fliegenheimer. Truth be told, I would change my name too, because you can't be a successful smuggler with that kind of alias. The man smuggled his way to wealth and fame and was more violent than you care to know. Seriously, some of the stuff I can't even talk about. A known racketeer, smuggler, and shyster. He was eventually betrayed and he perished. I believe the saying, live by the blam blam, perish by the blam blam, yeah, that applies here. Number 8, JFK Sr. Some may be surprised to know this, and others will understand this is very on brand for the Kennedy family, but they weren't exactly the squeaky clean all-American family you think they were. Never mind the numerous scandals and tragic life-losing accidents, the Kennedy fortune was something made in moonlight, i.e. illegally. Old man Kennedy made his fortune with bootleggers and well-known Italian mobsters during Prohibition in the 20s and the 30s. Yes, the Kennedy family has its ties in La Cosa Nostra. Or that doesn't exist if you ask Tony Soprano, depends who you ask. While this information wasn't the best kept secret, his connections with the mob made him very, very wealthy and powerful, and just may have had a hand in getting his son elected to presidency in the 1960s. Maybe, but I'll never tell, we'll never know. Number 7, NASCAR. Shout out to the southern states. There's a stock car track not too far from me which usually brings out a good crowd. Well, why in the heck am I bringing that up? Well, that's because NASCAR has its roots in moonshine runners, which is a fancy schmancy term for rednecks who distill illegal high-proof alcohol in secluded forested areas while under the supervision of moonlight. Ooh, scandalous. The early NASCAR legends may or may not have gotten their start during the late-night shine runs. I'm not gonna, I'll never know. We'll never know. I don't know, maybe, possibly. They did. I don't know what's more impressive, trying to boil corn down in the woods to make alcohol without hurting yourself or evading the law at top speeds on dirt roads. It's kind of impressive, actually. And the whole boiling process, it's hard. You ever looked that up, Chris? It's hard. Not that I would know, because I'm not a moonshiner. I wouldn't know. Number 6, Arnold Rothstein, crime lord of the Jewish American gangster underground, considered to be the smartest of all bootleggers. Ooh, what an honor. Sure, maybe he was the smartest. I mean, I'd personally just like to argue it's hard to catch any of these guys when there's so many to catch in the first place, but okay. After importing a lot of his alcohol from the very wet UK, and that's not a rain joke, they just had a lot of booze, he began spending his time diversifying into illegal sports betting and manipulation. Black Sox fans may recall the 1919 Black Sox scandal. Ooh, scandals, he manipulated the whole game. Eventually, like most gangsters, smugglers, and naughty people of the time, he caught a couple slugs to the body, and well, that was picture wrap for him. Don't be messing with the sports in a baseball and all that. Don't be messing with that. Number 5, Barry Seal. This guy lived the life of a man. Barry Seal was your average airline pilot in the 80s, but of course it was the 1980s. Man, I missed out. And he found himself in a very unique position. He was smuggling jungle sugar for the infamous Medellin cartel. Barry at one point was being paid $500,000 a flight and taking with him tons and tons of snowflake emoji, you know what I'm talking about. Well, eventually the DEA caught up with poor Barry and he became an informant for them. At his peak, the man was involved with the cartel, the DEA, and even a CIA investigation involving a Panamanian dictator. Ooh, crazy. That's, wow. Sadly for Barry, after testifying, the cartel found out, and then he ended up on the cartel's bad side, which means he's not around anymore. That's the best way to put it. He's sleeping with the fishes, if you know what I'm saying. Number 4, Meyer Lansky. Yet another Prohibition-era smuggler and crook, and a friend and associate of Lucky Luciano and other less than reputable Italian organized gentlemen, if you know what I'm saying. To the cops, it was the legitimate businessman's club. To everyone else, he was a ruthless criminal and responsible for smuggling all sorts of illicit products over the border. So, what makes him so great? Why is he on the list? He's just like every other gangster, right? Well, that's because, like many other of his associates and business partners, he didn't perish. He lived a rather long life. Especially for someone in his field, you really don't make it out that long. Making it all the way until 80 years old. And it was lung cancer that took him out, not a gangster. So that's kind of impressive. Not a lot of people live that long. Usually you write a book and, that's it. But that guy, he made it. He made it. Number 3, George Ramus. This is the textbook definition of, hey, if you can't beat them, join them. And I get that. I respect that. George Ramus was a lawyer defending Prohibition crooks, but like Saul Goodman, he said to himself, why cash bum checks when I can do much better than this? Heck, I can do this better than them. So that's exactly what Georgie did. He purchased a large supply of alcohol through a fake medical company. Then afterwards, he set up his own shipping company with his delivery trucks. And then he would send out his own delivery trucks out on an alcohol delivery, where he would then have his own goons rob said truck, his own truck, and then the truck would make its way to speakeasies or wherever they were needed, illegal businesses. Eventually he was caught and he got into some trouble. He lost a lot of money and it didn't look good. His wife left him, and after some time he saw her in the street and well, she didn't make it. He went back to court and they found him he was insane. They let him off, which is kind of crazy, even though it was in cold blood on the street. What a crazy story. I can't. Where's that movie? Where's that movie? Number 2, Al Capone, the king of bootlegging. I've talked about Capone in a few videos, but you gotta understand the impact this guy had. It's a rags to riches story, except the main character is a ruthless, merciless Italian-American gangster. He always thought of it as a simple service he was providing to the community, and while I can't begrudge anyone wanting a stiff drink after work, I don't blame you. Chris is probably gonna go home and have a beer after this. I'm gonna go home and have a beer after this. Right, Chris? Yep, so there you go. That's how it goes. I don't blame you. How can I? But it's the other stuff surrounding Capone that's really the issue at hand here. He smuggled in tons of booze every year and made millions, and did a lot of heinous things in between. Just remember folks, if you're gonna start a criminal empire, make sure to file your taxes because the IRS doesn't care if you're a ruthless criminal and violent so long as you pay your taxes. Yeah! Number 1, Pablo Escobar! Who else? Besides Han Solo, nobody beats Pablo in smuggling. Maybe Conja Club, maybe them, I don't know. The kingpin of the Medellin cartel and lord of Colombian snow. Pablo got to start smuggling simpler things into his country. Electronics, luxuries, and just other valuables. He worked his way up to, well, the same stuff that made Milli Vanilli palatable in the 80s, and the rest is history. Besides being the richest man on earth at one point, his fleet of vehicles speaks for themselves. Boats, cars, a taxi company, helicopters, planes, submarines, all kinds of houses. Just the guy owned a lot and had a lot of connections, especially smuggling routes. The DEA probably still has nightmares about it.